Hey guys, tonight we're drifting into the drowsy hills of ancient Greece, where shepherds tend their flocks under skies so thick with stars you could pluck them like grapes from a vine. You're walking barefoot through dewy grass on Mount Latmos, feeling the cool earth beneath your toes, watching the moon rise fat and golden over ridges that have witnessed 10,000 summers. The air smells of wild thyme and sleeping sheep, and somewhere in the distance, a single flute plays a melody that seems older than memory itself. Tonight, you'll meet a young man whose beauty stopped a goddess in her celestial tracks, creating a love story so peculiar it might just explain why the moon sometimes looks sad as she crosses the night sky. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for, like why we call someone moonstruck when love makes them act a little mad, or why the most peaceful sleep feels like being held by something vast and gentle. So before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below, but make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Tell me where you're listening from tonight, whether you're tucked under blankets in Toronto or watching stars fade in Sydney. Maybe share what helps you sleep best, rain sounds, fan hums, or stories like these that wrap around your mind like warm honey. Now, let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You find yourself on that mountainside centuries ago, living the simple life of Endymion, a shepherd whose days follow the sun's arc and whose nights belong to counting stars. Your hands smell of lanolin and hay. Your legs are strong from climbing rocky paths. You're not a prince or hero, just a young man who knows every sheep in his flock by the specific bleat of its voice, who can predict rain by how the wind shifts through the pines. But tonight, something different stirs in the heavens above you. The moon, Selene herself, goddess of that silver disk, is making her usual journey across the darkness when her light falls upon your sleeping form. You've dozed off against a warm boulder, your shepherd's crook resting in the crook of your arm, completely unaware that divinity is studying your face with growing fascination. Selene slows her chariot, pulled by white horses that snort stardust. She's seen countless mortals in her eternal rounds, watched civilizations bloom and crumble, but something about the curve of your cheekbone in moonlight, the peaceful set of your lips, stops her cold. Here's where the story gets interesting, because falling for a mortal when you're immortal presents certain logistical problems. Historians still argue whether Selene's love was genuine affection or divine obsession, the kind of fixation that doesn't recognize boundaries between worship and possession. You sleep on, innocent, while a goddess begins to unravel with wanting. Night after night, Selene returns. She neglects her duties, letting her chariot drift slower across the sky, causing ancient astronomers to scratch their heads at the moon's irregular movements. She descends from her celestial path to kneel beside you, running silver fingers through your hair, memorizing the rhythm of your breath. You might stir slightly, dreaming of strange lights and whispers, but you never fully wake. Not yet. The ancient Greeks loved these stories of gods falling for mortals because they revealed something uncomfortable about power and desire. When Zeus wanted Europa, he became a bull. When Poseidon desired Demeter, she couldn't exactly swipe left and block him. These myths acknowledge that when the powerful want something, the powerless rarely get a vote. But Selene's approach is different, softer, stranger, more patient. She watches you like you're the most compelling thing in creation, which, to be fair, must be refreshing when you've watched the same constellations rotate for eons. One quirky detail that some ancient sources mention: Endymion was sometimes said to be a king or astronomer before becoming a shepherd, someone who studied the very heavens that would eventually trap him. Imagine the irony, spending your youth mapping the moon's phases, never suspecting the moon was mapping you right back, learning the landscape of your dreams. You wake one morning with fragments of impossible memories, a woman's voice like silk over water, the sensation of being cradled by cool light. You shake your head, attribute it to too much wine the night before, and lead your flock to fresh pasture. But that night Selene comes again, and the night after, and the night after that. She's addicted now, this goddess, to something she can never truly have. A relationship with someone who experiences time, who ages, who will eventually crumble to dust while she continues her eternal orbit. The thought terrifies her. Already she notices a tiny line forming at the corner of your eye when you smile in your sleep. A single grey hair among the dark. Time is a thief, and it's coming for her beloved with patient, inevitable steps. Selene, who commands the tides and pulls at the ocean's heart, finds herself powerless against the simple march of mortal years. This is when the goddess makes a decision that will echo through poetry and art for millennia. She can't stop loving you, but she can't bear to watch you age and die. So she conceives a plan that feels like mercy, but might actually be the cruelest prison ever designed. A cage made entirely of gentleness, a trap baited with eternal peace. She'll approach the king of gods himself, Zeus, that chronic meddler in mortal affairs, and beg for a favour that will solve everything and ruin everything simultaneously. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. For now, you're still innocent, still waking with the dawn to tend your sheep, still completely unaware that the moon has fallen for you so hard she's about to rewrite the terms of your existence. You notice the sheep are restless tonight, bleating at shadows. You notice the moonlight seems particularly intense, almost liquid, pooling in the valleys like spilled cream. You don't notice. How could you? That you're living your last days of normal consciousness, that soon you'll enter a sleep so profound it becomes your entire world. The ancient world didn't have our vocabulary for consent and agency, but they understood tragedy. They knew that sometimes the worst things happen wrapped in beauty, that prison cells don't always have bars, that you can be absolutely cherished and absolutely trapped at the same time. Endymion's story isn't about a monster snatching a victim. It's about love that can't imagine any solution except to freeze its object in place forever, like a butterfly pinned to velvet, beautiful and still and slowly suffocating. Word count 1397. I need to add approximately 250 more words to reach the target. Continuing, you settle down that evening in your favourite spot, the cave on Mount Latmos where the stone still holds the day's warmth. Your dog curls against your side, and you run your fingers through its rough coat, staring up at the stars emerging one by one like shy children. The constellations tell their own stories. Orion forever hunting, the bears circling the pole, the river of light mortals called the Milky Way stretching across the darkness like a road to somewhere impossible. You don't know that this peaceful moment, this simple contentment, is about to become your eternity. The philosophers of Athens would later debate whether Endymion's fate was gift or curse, whether eternal sleep represents the ultimate peace or the ultimate loss. Can you truly be happy if you're not conscious of your happiness? Is a dream life a real life, or just an elaborate absence? These questions don't trouble you now. You're just tired from a long day of climbing and watching, ready for normal sleep. the kind you wake from. Your eyes grow heavy. The moon rises, impossibly bright, and Selene's face appears in its surface if you knew how to look. The goddess watches you slip into slumber, and her heart— do goddesses have hearts? —breaks and repairs itself simultaneously, knowing what she's about to request, knowing she can't stop herself from requesting it. Tomorrow, everything changes. But tonight, for one last time, you're simply Endymion, a shepherd who tends his flock and dreams ordinary dreams and belongs entirely to himself. The moon hangs lower tonight than it should, so close you could almost reach up and touch its silver edge. Selene abandons her usual distant orbit, her chariot drifting earthward like a leaf on invisible currents. Her white horses stamp impatiently, their hooves striking sparks from the air itself, but she barely notices. She's watching you sleep, Endymion, and every night the pull grows stronger, the obsession deeper, until she can barely remember what mattered before she discovered your face. You breathe slowly, peacefully, unaware that divinity kneels beside you. Selene traces the line of your jaw with fingers that don't quite touch, afraid that contact might wake you and break this perfect tableau. She's a goddess who commands the ocean's tides, who pulls the blood in mortal veins according to her phases, yet here she is, reduced to trembling at the sight of a sleeping shepherd. The other Olympians would laugh if they knew. Perhaps they already do. The gods notice everything eventually, and secrets among immortals last about as long as morning dew. Here's something historians still argue about: whether Selene was one of the Titans, older than the Olympian gods themselves, or merely a second-generation goddess born after Zeus's revolution. If she's Titan old, then her obsession with you carries extra weight. She's witnessed the rise and fall of entire divine dynasties, seen her own siblings imprisoned in Tartarus, endured eons of cosmic loneliness. No wonder a beautiful mortal feels like water in an eternal desert. Night after night she returns. Her duties suffer spectacularly. The moon wanders across the sky at irregular intervals, sometimes rushing, sometimes dawdling, causing ancient astronomers in Babylon and Egypt to revise their calculations and wonder if the heavens themselves have gone mad. Farmers plant by unreliable moonlight. Sailors navigate by a celestial body that seems distracted, love-drunk, utterly unreliable. But Selene doesn't care about farmers or sailors. She cares about the rise and fall of your chest, the small movements your eyes make beneath closed lids, the mystery of what you're dreaming. She begins to speak to you, knowing you can't hear, pouring out confessions to your unconscious ears. She tells you about the loneliness of immortality, how watching civilizations bloom and crumble gets exhausting after the first few millennia. She describes the colour of Earth from her usual height. Blues and browns and greens all swirled together like a marble, beautiful but impossibly distant. She admits she's tired of being worshipped, how prayers feel like demands, how humans build her temples but never really see her. Not the way you would if you opened your eyes right now. But you don't open your eyes. You dream of sheep and summer grass, completely innocent of the divine crisis unfolding beside your sleeping form, the quirky truth. Some ancient sources claim Selene bore Endymion 50 daughters during these nocturnal visits, the Menai, minor goddesses of the months. 50 daughters from a man who never woke up, which raises questions the ancient Greeks cheerfully ignored about consciousness and conception. The myths weren't big on logistics. They cared about emotional truth, about capturing how love feels when it consumes you completely, when rational thought evaporates like rain on hot stones. Selene knows this can't continue. Already she sees time's tiny signatures on your skin, a freckle that wasn't there last month, a small scar from a thorn bush, the almost imperceptible softening of youth into early manhood. You're aging. Not quickly, not drastically, but inevitably, and each small change feels like a knife twisting in her immortal heart. She imagines your hair going grey, your back bending with years, your beautiful face collapsing into the geography of old age. She imagines attending your funeral pyre, watching your body return to ash and elements while she continues forever, condemned to circle the earth for eternity with only the memory of these nights. The thought is unbearable. Selene, who has endured the titanomachy and the birth of the cosmos, who has witnessed stars collapse and civilizations vanish, discovers she cannot endure the simple fact of your mortality. This is when gods become dangerous, not when they hate, but when they love too much, when their affection curdles into possession and they decide to preserve what they cherish by stopping time itself. She makes her decision on a night when the air smells of coming autumn. The seasons are changing as they always do, reminding her that change is the fundamental law of mortal existence. Everything flows, everything fades, everything dies. Except she's going to break that law. She's going to find a loophole in mortality itself, and she's going to trap you in amber, in stasis, in eternal perfect preservation. The plan forms like frost on glass. She'll go to Zeus, king of Olympus, that eternal schemer who's interfered in countless mortal lives for far less noble reasons than love. She'll beg, plead, bargain, whatever it takes. Zeus loves a good romantic tragedy, especially when he's not the one causing it for once. Surely he'll see reason. Surely he'll grant her this one favour. You stir in your sleep, murmuring something about lost lambs, and Selene's resolve crystallizes into diamond-hard certainty. She rises, her form shimmering back into pure moonlight, and her chariot races across the sky faster than it has in weeks. The horses sense her urgency, stretching their celestial necks, their manes streaming silver fire. She's heading for Olympus, for Zeus's throne room, for the conversation that will seal your fate. Behind her, you sleep on, innocent and doomed. The cave around you breathes with night sounds, crickets singing their complicated songs, an owl asking its eternal question, wind fingering through the pines. Your dog shifts closer, instinctively sensing something momentous approaching. But you just dream of ordinary things, because you're an ordinary man caught in an extraordinary story. A mortal about to become mythology's strangest prisoner. The ancient Greeks understood something we sometimes forget, that love and harm aren't opposites. You can genuinely adore someone and still destroy them. You can act from the purest affection and create the cruelest cage. Selena loves you absolutely, completely, with every particle of her divine being. And that love is about to erase you more thoroughly than hatred ever could. By morning, when you wake for what might be the last normal sunrise of your life, everything will look the same. The sheep will need tending. The grass will be wet with dew. The mountains will stand eternal and indifferent. But somewhere on Olympus, a goddess is negotiating the terms of your imprisonment, and she's doing it with tears of devotion streaming down her immortal face, believing with her whole heart that she's saving you, never understanding that salvation and destruction sometimes wear the same gentle mask. Word count, 1 on 198, continuing to reach target. The sun rises over Mount Latmos, painting the rocks gold and pink, and you stretch and yawn and begin another day, completely unaware that divine wheels are turning, that your name is being spoken in halls of power you've never imagined. You notice the moon is still visible in the morning sky, a pale ghost of itself, and you think idly that it looks almost sad, almost hesitant, like it doesn't want to leave. You're right, of course. Selene is watching you even now, her light fading as Apollo's sun takes dominance, watching you move through your morning routine, checking the sheep, breaking your fast with bread and cheese, whistling a tune that drifts through the valleys like companionship. She's memorizing you, this version of you that still belongs to yourself, that still moves and thinks and chooses. Soon, very soon, there will only be one version of you, sleeping, perfect, frozen, forever young. The goddess tells herself this is mercy. She tells herself she's protecting you from pain, from aging, from death's inevitable embrace. She doesn't let herself think about what she's stealing. Every future choice, every experience, every moment of conscious joy or sorrow. She focuses only on preservation, on keeping you exactly as you are in this perfect moment, and you, innocent Endymion, tend your sheep and watch clouds and have absolutely no idea that you're living your last hours of freedom. Olympus rises above the mortal world like a dream made of marble and cloud, its peaks piercing into realms where air becomes pure light. You've never been there, of course. You're a shepherd, not a hero, not someone who catches divine attention through valor or hubris. But Selene ascends those impossible heights now, her chariot leaving trails of silver across the dawn sky, her heart hammering with an urgency that feels foreign to immortal veins. She's going to petition Zeus, and the thought terrifies her more than she'll admit, because asking favors from the king of gods is like making deals with lightning itself, unpredictable, dangerous, prone to striking in unexpected ways. Zeus lounges on his throne, enormous and crackling with barely contained power. He's been expecting her naturally. The gods know everything worth knowing, especially when it involves one of their own acting strangely. He's watched Selena's erratic moon paths with amusement, heard the gossip among the lesser deities about the lovesick goddess and her mortal shepherd. Now here she is, standing before him with her pride in tatters, ready to beg. So, Zeus rumbles, his voice like distant thunder, the moon herself comes petitioning. This must be about that pretty boy you've been watching sleep. He grins, not unkindly, but with the casual cruelty of someone who's never been powerless, never been desperate. Tell me, Selene, what exactly do you want me to do about your mortal problem? Selene straightens her spine, tries to reclaim some dignity. I want you to make him immortal, she says simply, like Ganymede, like the others you've elevated. Grant Endymion eternal life so he can be with me forever. Here's where the story takes its strange turn, because Zeus doesn't immediately refuse. Historians still argue whether what happens next is mercy or mockery, whether Zeus genuinely wants to help or simply enjoys putting divine desires through a philosophical meat grinder. He strokes his beard, considering, while Selene's hope rises like a bird taking flight. Immortality, Zeus muses. Yes, I could grant that. But immortality comes in many flavors, dear Selene. Eternal life doesn't necessarily mean eternal youth, eternal consciousness, eternal joy. Would you like him to live forever while still aging? Imagine your beautiful shepherd at 200 years old, at 500, at 1,000, his body deteriorating endlessly, but never quite dying, just becoming more and more a prison for his mind. Selene pales. No, of course not. I want him preserved exactly as he is. Ah, says Zeus, warming to the topic like a philosophy teacher who's found an especially interesting paradox. Preserved. like a flower pressed in a book perhaps. But flowers in books don't grow or change. They don't experience anything. Is that what you want? A beautiful corpse that breathes? I want him safe, Selene insists, frustration creeping into her voice. Safe from time, from decay, from death. I want to keep him. And there it is, the word that reveals everything. Keep, like a possession, a treasure, something to be locked away and protected. Zeus hears it, and his eyes gleam with the particular satisfaction of someone who's about to teach a lesson through granting exactly what was asked for. Very well, he says, I'll offer young Endymion a choice. That's fair, isn't it? I'll give him several options for immortality, and he can choose which he prefers. How does that sound? It sounds like a trap, but Selene's too desperate to recognize the teeth hidden in the offer. She nods, grateful, relieved, already imagining her eternity with you. Zeus waves his hand dismissively, and suddenly you're no longer on Mount Latmos. You're standing in the throne room of Olympus itself, confused and terrified, still smelling of sheep and mountain herbs, completely out of your depth. You see Zeus first, impossible to miss, radiating power that makes your teeth ache, and then you see Selene, recognizing her somehow, even though you've only glimpsed her in dreams. She's more beautiful than moonlight on water, more lovely than spring's first morning, and she's looking at you with such desperate affection it makes your chest hurt. Endymion! Zeus's voice crashes over you like a wave. The goddess Selene has requested that I grant you immortality, so you might be her companion through eternity. Generous of her, wouldn't you say? But I believe in fairness, in choice, so I offer you 3 options. You're too stunned to speak, so Zeus continues, counting on his fingers like he's explaining something to a child. Option 1, immortal life with eternal youth. You'll never age, never die, free to wander the earth forever. Of course, you'll watch everyone you know grow old and die. Your friends, your family, everyone you'll ever love except Selene will turn to dust while you continue. Eventually you'll outlive nations, languages, the very shape of the coastlines. The loneliness might drive you mad, but you'll be alive and young forever. You swallow hard. That sounds less like a gift and more like a particularly creative torture. Option 2, immortal life without eternal youth. You'll live forever, but continue aging. Imagine being 10,000 years old, your body so ancient it's basically fossilizing, but death never comes to release you. You'd become a whisper of a person, a consciousness trapped in an ever-deteriorating shell. That sounds even worse. You're starting to understand why some heroes refuse divine gifts. Option 3, Zeus says, and now his smile turns almost kind, almost pitying. Eternal sleep. I'll grant you ageless immortality, but you'll spend it slumbering in the cave on Mount Latmos where Selene first found you. You'll never age, never sicken, never die. You'll simply sleep and dream forever. Selene can visit whenever she wishes. You'll be together, in a sense, for eternity. The quirky truth that some ancient sources mention. In some versions, Endymion himself requested this fate, choosing sleep over the burden of consciousness. But most tellings suggest Zeus or Selene made the choice for him, understanding that a young shepherd couldn't possibly comprehend what he was agreeing to, that all 3 options were different flavours of prison. You look at Selene, seeing the desperate hope in her eyes, understanding somehow that she wants you preserved like a precious object, kept safe and unchanging. You think about option 1, the loneliness of outliving everything. Option 2, the horror of endless decay. Option 3. No more choices, no more experiences, but also no more pain, no more loss, just endless dreaming in the arms of the goddess who loves you. What would you choose? What could you choose, really, when all the options are different paths to the same essential tragedy? You're a mortal trying to make decisions about eternity, a finite being attempting to imagine infinity. It's like asking a candle to comprehend the sun. You begin, your voice small in that vast throne room, and the word hangs in the air like a condemned man's last breath, heavy with implications you don't fully understand, weighted with consequences that will echo through millennia of poetry and art and stories told to help people sleep, continuing to target. Zeus watches you with something almost like sympathy. He's done this before, offered mortals choices that aren't really choices, presented options that all lead to the same essential surrender. He knows what you'll pick before you know yourself. Humans always choose sleep when the alternatives are conscious suffering. It's why death exists in the first place, a mercy built into the fabric of mortality. Selene holds her breath, lunar and lovely and terrible in her hope. She doesn't see the cruelty in what she's asking, doesn't understand that love without the beloved's participation is just elaborate narcissism. She wants you, like a child wants a favourite toy, to keep, to hold, to possess forever. That this possession requires your complete absence doesn't occur to her, or if it does, she's decided the price is acceptable. And you, poor Endymion, you're starting to understand that you've already lost. The moment Selene's gaze fell upon you, the moment divine attention fixed itself to your mortal frame, your freedom evaporated like morning dew. The choice you're about to make isn't really yours. It's been shaped by forces you can't begin to comprehend, by desires that have nothing to do with your own wishes and everything to do with a goddess's refusal to accept loss. You choose sleep, of course. How could you not? When the alternatives are watching everyone you love die while you persist like a stone, or aging eternally into a living mummy, eternal slumber sounds almost gentle. Zeus nods as though he expected exactly this answer, and Selene's face floods with relief so profound it's almost painful to witness. She gets to keep you now, forever, exactly as you are in this moment, young and beautiful and completely unable to disagree with her. But before the sleep takes hold, before Zeus's power wraps around you like a blanket you'll never shake off, another god enters the equation. Hypnos, the god of sleep itself, materializes at the edge of the throne room like a yawn given form. He's soft-edged and gentle-voiced, easier to look at than the other Olympians, radiating the kind of tranquility you feel when you're halfway between waking and dreaming. He's been listening naturally. Sleep hears everything whispered in the dark, and he has thoughts about this arrangement. A mortal condemned to eternal sleep, Hypnos murmurs, his voice like silk sliding over skin. How interesting. But sleep without dreams is just death wearing a kinder mask, wouldn't you say? If young Endymion is to slumber forever, he should at least have something to occupy his mind, don't you think? Zeus shrugs, unconcerned. Selene looks uncertain, not quite understanding where this is going. And you're already feeling the first tendrils of drowsiness creeping through your limbs, Zeus's power beginning its work, your eyelids growing heavy as marble. Hypnos approaches you, and his presence smells like lavender and warm milk, like childhood bedtimes and afternoon naps in summer grass. I have 50 daughters, he tells you, though you're barely tracking the words anymore. The Oneiroi, dream spirits, each one unique, each one capable of weaving entire lifetimes while you sleep. I'll give them to you, Endymion. 50 daughters of dream to keep you company through eternity. It sounds generous, almost kind, except historians still argue whether this gift is blessing or additional torture. 50 dream daughters means 50 different dreams, 50 different lives you'll experience in your endless sleep. But you'll never truly live any of them. You'll be a dreamer dreaming he's living, never quite real, never quite present, experiencing everything and nothing simultaneously. The quirky detail. Some sources claim these 50 daughters of Hypnos are the same as Selene's 50 daughters, the Menai, that in your dreams you actually father goddesses, that your unconscious mind becomes productive in ways your waking body never could. The mythology gets tangled here, confused, because the Greeks cared more about emotional resonance than consistent record-keeping. What matters is the image. A sleeping man who becomes a father to months, to dreams, to time itself, all while never opening his eyes. You sink down right there in the throne room, your legs folding beneath you, and Selene rushes forward to catch you before you hit the marble floor. Her arms wrap around you, the first time she's truly held you while you're even partially conscious, and she feels solid and cool and eternal. You try to speak, to ask a question you're already forgetting, but the words dissolve into nonsense syllables, into soft breathing, into the deep rhythm of a sleep you'll never wake from. Zeus waves his hand, and suddenly you're back in your cave on Mount Latmos, arranged carefully against the stone as though you've just dozed off naturally. Your shepherd's crook rests nearby. Your dog curls against your side, confused by your sudden stillness, but loyal enough to stay. The sheep outside bleat their evening songs, unaware their shepherd is gone, replaced by something that looks like him but isn't, not really, more like a statue that breathes, a painting that dreams. Hypnos keeps his promise. The dreams begin almost immediately, flowing into your sleeping mind like water into a cup. In the first dream, you're a king ruling a vast empire, making decisions that affect thousands. You feel the weight of the crown, taste the wine at your feasts, embrace your dream wives and raise your dream children. It feels absolutely real, this dream life, so vivid you'd swear you can smell the cedar wood of your throne room, hear the clash of your armies conquering distant lands. But it isn't real. You're asleep in a cave, unmoving, while your mind constructs elaborate fictions to occupy eternity. And when that dream ends, does it end after a year, a century? Time has no meaning in sleep. Another begins. In this one, you're a sailor exploring uncharted waters, discovering islands that never existed, falling in love with mermaids who sing in languages you've invented. The salt spray feels genuine on your face. The rocking of the ship seems to move your very bones. Still not real. You're still in the cave, still sleeping, while centuries might be passing outside, or perhaps only minutes. Who can say? Sleep distorts duration until it becomes meaningless. The daughters of Hypnos take turns weaving their dreams into your unconscious mind. One shows you a life as a great philosopher, debating in Athens' agora, discovering truths about the nature of reality, even as you exist in a reality that's purely fictional. Another makes you a warrior, fighting battles that feel urgent and necessary, dying heroically and then waking, not really waking, never truly waking, into another dream where you're someone else entirely. Some dreams are beautiful. You wander through gardens that smell of honeysuckle and roses, where fountains play music and the fruit tastes like sunlight. You fall in love 1,000 times with 1,000 different dream women, each romance feeling unique and precious and real. You experience joy so profound it makes your sleeping body smile, lips curving upward in the cave while Selene watches from above. Other dreams are strange, unsettling. You're a bird flying over landscapes that shift like water. You speak in languages that don't exist, solving riddles posed by creatures from myth and madness. You die and are reborn, die and are reborn, each death feeling genuine, each rebirth arriving with a shock of consciousness regained. Except you never actually regain consciousness. Not really. It's dreams all the way down, turtles upon turtles, sleep upon sleep upon sleep, and through it all Selene visits. She descends from her nightly circuit to kneel beside your sleeping form, running her fingers through your hair, whispering endearments you don't consciously hear, but that might infiltrate your dreams like themes in music. She tells herself you're happy, that the small movements your face makes, the flickers of expression as dreams play across your mind, mean contentment. She never asks whether happiness counts if you're not aware you're happy, if joy experienced only in dreams is actually joy at all. The ancient Greeks had a complicated relationship with sleep and dreams. They built temples to Hypnos and his children, seeking prophetic visions in ritual slumber. They believed dreams could reveal truth, that the gods spoke through the medium of sleep. But they also feared endless sleep, understood it as a kind of death, a severance from the waking world that mattered. Endymion's fate sits right at that uncomfortable intersection, blessed or cursed, saved or destroyed, depending entirely on how you define consciousness, presence, life itself. Your dog eventually dies, faithful to the last, its old bones giving out while you sleep on, unchanging. Generations of sheep are born and slaughtered and replaced. The cave around you weathers slowly, limestone dripping into new formations, but you don't age a single day. Your face remains exactly as it was the moment sleep claimed you. Young, peaceful, beautiful enough to break a goddess's heart over and over again. Do you dream about your real life sometimes? Do the 50 daughters of Hypnos occasionally weave memories into their fictions? Your actual childhood, your real flock, the genuine sensation of climbing Mount Latmos in morning light? Or have your true memories dissolved completely, replaced by the accumulated weight of 10,000 fictional lives, leaving you unable to remember which experiences were real and which were merely dreamed? The mythology doesn't say. It can't say, because you can't report back, can't wake to tell scholars what eternal sleep feels like from the inside. You're trapped in the most complete isolation imaginable, not imprisoned in a cell where you might shout through bars, but imprisoned in your own unconsciousness, unreachable, unknowable, gone. Mount Latmos changes around you while you sleep, seasons turning like pages in a book you'll never read. Winter frost creeps into your cave, making the stone glitter with ice, but you don't shiver. Zeus's gift includes immunity to discomfort, apparently. Spring arrives with wildflowers crowding the cave mouth, their scent drifting over your motionless form, but you don't smell them. Summer bakes the rocks hot enough to burn bare feet, and autumn paints the mountainside in shades of gold and rust, but you experience none of it. You're elsewhere, lost in whatever dream currently holds you, living imaginary lives while your actual life consists solely of breathing and being watched. The locals discover you eventually, of course. A shepherd searching for a lost lamb stumbles into the cave and finds you there, sleeping so peacefully you might be dead except for the barely perceptible rise and fall of your chest. Word spreads through the villages clustered around Mount Latmos. There's a young man in the cave who never wakes, who's been sleeping for weeks now, maybe months. Impossible to say. Some say he's cursed. Others claim he's blessed. A few wise old women nod knowingly and whisper about the moon goddess and her strange appetites. Here's where the story gets unexpectedly touching, because the locals don't disturb you. They don't try to wake you or move you or exploit your strange condition. Instead, they begin to treat your cave as a sacred site, a shrine to something they don't fully understand but recognize as holy. They leave offerings at the cave mouth, bowls of milk that cats lap up, honey cakes that ants discover, wine that evaporates in the summer heat. They whisper prayers before your sleeping form, asking for good dreams, peaceful rest, relief from insomnia and nightmares. The cult of Endymion grows organically, quietly, without temples or official priests. Mothers bring children who can't sleep, laying them near your motionless body, hoping some of your profound slumber might transfer through proximity. Elderly men exhausted by years of labour come to sit beside you, envying what they see as perfect peace. Young lovers carve your name alongside their own in the cave walls, asking the sleeping shepherd to bless their unions. Apparently eternal sleep makes you an expert on love. Never mind that you're its most obvious victim. Historians still argue whether this cult actually existed, or if later writers invented it to give Endymion's story more cultural weight. Evidence is scarce, scattered. A few inscriptions mentioning the sleeper of Latmos, some coins from the region showing a reclining figure beneath a crescent moon, fragments of pottery depicting what might be offerings at a cave shrine. The ancient world left frustratingly incomplete records, forcing modern scholars to reconstruct worship practices from breadcrumbs and educated guesses. But imagine it's real, this quiet pilgrimage site. Imagine people climbing Mount Latmos in darkness, timing their visits to coincide with the full moon, because they believe Selene's power is strongest then. They enter your cave with reverence, speaking in hushed voices so as not to disturb your sleep, which is hilarious when you think about it, since nothing could disturb your sleep, nothing short of Zeus himself deciding to reverse his gift. A full orchestra could play beside your head, and you'd continue dreaming peacefully, utterly unreachable. The quirky detail that some sources mention: certain pilgrims claim they could hear you dreaming, that if they pressed their ears close to your chest they'd hear whispers of the lives you were living in sleep. A woman swore she heard you speaking fluent Egyptian, describing the construction of pyramids. A young scholar insisted you were reciting poetry in a language he'd never encountered. A child claimed you were laughing, deep belly laughs, like someone hearing the world's best joke, and the sound made everyone in the cave start laughing too, though they didn't know why. Were these accounts true? Probably not. More likely, the pilgrims heard what they wanted to hear, projected their own desires onto your silence, filled your mystery with whatever they needed to find. That's what sacred spaces do. They become mirrors reflecting the observer's inner landscape back at them, and a sleeping man makes the perfect blank canvas for other people's interpretations. Selene visits most nights, though not every night. She still has celestial duties, tides to pull, lunar phases to maintain. But when she comes, she descends in full glory, her chariot parked outside the cave, its silver light flooding the interior until everything seems underwater, dreamlike, perfect. She sits beside you and talks, one-sided conversations that last for hours. She tells you about her night's journey, describes the earth from her vantage point, shares gossip about the other gods. She complains about Apollo's arrogance, wonders aloud whether Zeus ever regrets anything, admits she's lonely despite having you. That last part is the tragic irony, isn't it? She demanded eternal companionship and ended up lonelier than ever, because you can't actually be her companion when you're unconscious. She has your body, your preserved beauty, your eternal presence, but none of the things that make companionship meaningful: conversation, shared experiences, the mutual recognition of two consciousnesses acknowledging each other. She's essentially married a very lifelike statue, and she's slowly realizing that possession isn't the same as connection. But gods rarely admit mistakes, especially mistakes they insisted on making despite everyone's better judgment. So Selene continues her visits, continues her monologues, continues to run her fingers through your hair and memorize the unchanging landscape of your face. She tells herself this is enough, that she's content, that she made the right choice saving you from mortality's cruel march. Sometimes pilgrims arrive while she's there, and they freeze in terror or wonder, watching moonlight made manifest kneel beside the sleeping shepherd. Selene doesn't acknowledge them usually. Mortals are beneath her notice, insects crawling around the edges of her tragedy. But occasionally she'll glance up, and her eyes will be wet with something that might be tears, or might just be the natural luminescence of a lunar goddess, and the pilgrims will back away slowly, understanding they've witnessed something too intimate for mortal eyes. The years accumulate like dust. 10 years pass, 20, 50. You don't age a single day, but the world around you transforms relentlessly. The shepherd who first found you dies of old age. The villages around Mount Latmos grow and shrink according to the fortunes of harvest and war. New cults rise and fall, new gods gain popularity while old ones fade into obscurity. But your cult persists, small and steady, because people always need somewhere to take their sleep troubles, their exhaustion, their desperate desire for rest. 100 years after your sleep began, an old woman climbs Mount Latmos on arthritic knees, determined to see the legendary sleeper before she dies. She enters your cave, looks at your young face, and starts crying. "Still so young," she murmurs, "still so beautiful, still so gone." She leaves you her most precious possession, a wooden bird her husband carved before the war took him. It sits on a stone ledge, slowly rotting, and you never know it's there. 200 years later, a young poet visits, hoping for inspiration. He studies your face by moonlight, and later he writes verses about eternal sleep and divine love that people will still be reading 1,000 years hence. The poem makes you famous across the Greek-speaking world, turns you from a local phenomenon into a universal symbol of beauty, preserved, innocence trapped, love's terrible selfishness. And through it all you sleep, you dream, you live 1,000,000 lives that aren't real while your real life consists entirely of this, lying still, breathing slowly, being looked at, being loved from a distance that might as well be infinite. The daughters of Hypnos continue their work, weaving new dreams to replace the old, ensuring your mind never rests even though your body never moves. It's the strangest mercy, the cruelest kindness, a gift that looks more like a curse the longer you examine it. Do you know, in some deep unconscious way, what's been done to you? Do the dreams sometimes include the truth? Selene's face, Zeus's choice, the cave that's become your eternal prison? Or has your mind constructed elaborate explanations for your condition, convinced itself this is normal, that everyone experiences existence as an endless stream of disconnected dream lives? Nobody knows. Nobody can know. You're the ultimate unreliable narrator, the witness who can never testify, the victim or beneficiary, depending on your perspective, of a fate that leaves no room for self-reporting. Let's drift away from Mount Latmos for a while, leaving you to your endless dreaming, and find another figure whose story echoes yours in strange ways. His name is Narcissus, and unlike you, he's very much awake, at least at the beginning. He walks through the forests of Boeotia with a kind of unconscious grace that makes flowers seem to turn toward him, tracking his movement like he's the sun itself. He's beautiful, this young man, so strikingly lovely that his beauty becomes a problem, a curse disguised as a gift, much like your eternal sleep. You'd understand each other, maybe, if you could meet, both of you destroyed by being too much of something, too beautiful for the world to let you be. But you're trapped in sleep, and he's trapped in wakefulness, in awareness, in the terrible consciousness of being desired by everyone while desiring no one, at least not yet. Narcissus moves through his days rejecting suitors with the casual cruelty of someone who's never wanted anything badly enough to understand heartbreak. Nymphs follow him through the forest, whispering love poems from behind trees. Mortal girls invent excuses to cross his path, hoping for a glance, a word, any scrap of attention. Young men watch him with complicated expressions, desire mixed with envy, mixed with frustration. But Narcissus notices none of them, or if he notices, he doesn't care. His heart remains untouched, cold as marble, indifferent as the moon. Speaking of which, does Selene ever notice him during her nightly rounds? Does she feel a flicker of temptation before remembering her sleeping shepherd? Here's where the story takes its famous turn, because one of the nymphs Narcissus rejects is named Echo, and her rejection carries consequences that ripple out like stones dropped in still water. But we'll get to Echo in a moment. First, you need to understand what happens when Narcissus stops by a mountain pool to drink, throat dry from walking, completely innocent of what this simple act will cost him. The pool is perfect, spring-fed, crystal clear, surrounded by trees that keep the water cool even in summer heat. The ancient Greeks loved these natural mirrors, saw them as places where worlds touched, where the boundary between reality and reflection grew permeable. Narcissus kneels at the water's edge, leans forward to drink, and sees the most beautiful face he's ever encountered looking back at him. He doesn't recognize it as his own reflection. Why would he? Mirrors were rare and expensive in the ancient world, polished bronze that gave only approximate images. Most people went their entire lives without seeing their own faces clearly. So when Narcissus sees this stunning youth staring up at him from the water, he assumes it's another being, a water spirit perhaps, or a minor god inhabiting this pool, and he falls in love, instantly, completely, with the kind of totality he's never felt before. All those rejected suitors, all that indifference, all that cold disinterest, it evaporates in a single moment as Narcissus discovers what it feels like to want something desperately. He reaches for the beautiful face, and it reaches back, but when his fingers break the water's surface, the image dissolves into ripples. He waits for the water to still, and the face returns, and he tries again. Same result. The beautiful stranger seems to want him too, mirrors his expressions perfectly, leans close when Narcissus leans close, but contact is impossible. Historians still argue about what Narcissus's story originally meant before it became a parable about vanity. Some scholars suggest it's about the impossibility of self-knowledge, the way we can never truly see ourselves objectively. Others read it as a warning about desire, how wanting something unattainable can become its own form of prison. A few interpretive souls claim it's about the dangers of perfection, how being too beautiful isolates you from normal human connection, until you can only love an ideal that doesn't exist. The quirky truth. Some ancient versions of this myth claim Narcissus had a twin sister who died young, and what he sees in the pool isn't himself but his dead sister's face, making his fixation grief rather than vanity. That version transforms the story from a tale about self-absorption into something achingly sad. A young man trying to reach across the boundary between life and death, trying to touch someone he lost, never understanding that he's mourning himself. But in most tellings, Narcissus simply doesn't recognize his own reflection. He stays by that pool, staring at the water, trying to embrace an image that flees at the slightest touch. He stops eating, stops sleeping. His beauty, which sustained itself on youth and vitality, begins to fade. His cheeks hollow, his eyes sink. His skin loses its glow. He's dying of unrequited love for himself, which would be funny if it weren't so desperately sad. He talks to the reflection, holds full conversations with it, asking why this beautiful stranger refuses him when their attraction seems mutual. "Why do you pull away when I reach for you?" he asks the water. "I see love in your eyes. I see longing. Why won't you let me touch you?" And the face in the pool mouths the same words silently, perfectly synchronized, giving Narcissus the impression of communication without any actual exchange of information. It's the loneliest possible love affair, a relationship with yourself that you don't recognize as yourself, all the intimacy of self-knowledge without any of the understanding. At least you, sleeping Endymion, have the daughters of Hypnos weaving companionship into your dreams. Narcissus has only this mute reflection, this impossible beloved who seems so close and remains forever untouchable. Days pass, weeks maybe. Time loses meaning when you're dying of love beside a pool. Narcissus grows weaker, his body starting to resemble those rejected suitors who pined away for him. The universe's idea of poetic justice, apparently. His beauty transforms from vibrant to ethereal, from healthy to ghostly. He becomes translucent, like he's fading into the reflection rather than the reflection fading into him. The forest creatures notice. Deer approach the pool cautiously, sensing something wrong. Birds stop singing in the trees overhead, their cheerful songs feeling inappropriate for whatever tragedy is unfolding. And the nymphs who once loved him watch from a distance, torn between satisfaction at his suffering. He rejected them after all, and genuine grief at watching someone so beautiful destroy himself. One nymph in particular watches with special pain, her heart breaking in ways that are both metaphorical and horrifyingly literal. Her name is Echo, and she loved Narcissus first, loved him hardest, and her rejection by him carried consequences that make his fate seem almost gentle by comparison. But we haven't gotten to her story yet, haven't explained why her love was always doomed, why she could never truly speak to him, even when she tried. For now, just know that Narcissus kneels by his pool, growing weaker by the hour, whispering love words to a reflection that can never answer, trapped in the cruelest kind of loop, wanting himself without knowing it's himself he wants, reaching for connection and finding only his own reaching hand reflected back, alone in the most complete way possible, even though his own face keeps him constant company. The ancient Greeks understood that beauty could be a curse, that being extraordinary in any direction, too lovely, too strong, too clever, invites divine attention, and divine attention rarely ends well for mortals. Narcissus didn't ask to be beautiful any more than you asked to catch Selene's eye. But beauty makes you visible, and visibility makes you vulnerable, and vulnerability in the presence of gods or fate or your own impossible standards is essentially a death sentence, just one that takes its time arriving. Before Narcissus discovered the pool that would become his grave, Before he knelt by water and lost himself in reflection, there was Echo. You need to understand Echo to understand the full tragedy, because her curse makes his curse possible, and her love amplifies his doom in ways that turn this from a simple cautionary tale into something that breaks your heart if you think about it too long. Echo was a nymph, an Oread specifically, one of the mountain spirits who lived in caves and crags and high places where air grows thin and gods sometimes walk. She loved talking, this nymph, loved conversation and stories and the sound of her own voice weaving elaborate tales. She was charming, witty, the kind of person who could hold court at divine gatherings, making even the immortals laugh with her clever observations and perfectly timed jokes. Words were her gift, her joy, her primary way of connecting with the world, until Hera took them away. Here's what happened. Zeus, being Zeus, was conducting another affair with a nymph, and he needed someone to distract his wife while he finished his divine business. Echo volunteered, or maybe Zeus asked, or maybe she just happened to be in the wrong place with the wrong skill set. Either way, she kept Hera occupied with long, rambling stories, buying Zeus time to cover his tracks. The Queen of the Gods realized eventually what was happening, and her rage fell on Echo like a hammer. Hera's punishments were always creative, always fitting, always worse than simple death. She could have killed Echo, could have turned her to stone or scattered her atoms across the cosmos. Instead, she took away Echo's voice. Not completely, but in a way that made keeping it almost more cruel than losing it entirely. From that moment forward, Echo could only repeat the last words spoken to her. She couldn't initiate conversation, couldn't express original thoughts, couldn't tell stories or make jokes or do any of the things that made her essentially herself. Imagine it. Imagine having a mind full of thoughts, feelings, opinions, desperately wanting to communicate, and being physically unable to say anything except fragments of what others say first. It's like being buried alive in your own head, conscious and aware but unable to reach out, unable to make yourself understood except through broken mirrors of other people's words. Historians still argue whether this punishment represents divine justice or divine cruelty, whether Echo deserved her fate for abetting Zeus's infidelity. The ancient Greeks had complicated ideas about collective responsibility. If you helped someone commit a wrong, you shared in the wrongness, even if you were just a pawn in a larger game. But the punishment seemed so disproportionate, so creatively vicious, that it's hard to see it as anything except Hera's frustration finding an outlet in someone who couldn't fight back. So Echo wandered the mountains with her broken voice, lonely in ways that transcend simple isolation. She could be surrounded by people and still unable to truly speak with them. Other nymphs tried to include her at first, but conversation with someone who can only echo becomes awkward fast. It feels less like talking to a person and more like shouting into a canyon, hearing your own words bounced back, never getting genuine response or original thought. Then Narcissus appeared in her forest, and Echo felt something she hadn't felt since her curse. Hope. He was so beautiful, this young man, moving through the trees with unconscious grace, and Echo followed him like moonlight follows the earth, helpless to do otherwise. She watched him from behind rocks and trees, memorizing the way he moved, the expressions that crossed his face, the small gestures that made him seem almost within reach. She wanted to speak to him, desperately, wanted to introduce herself, to charm him with conversation the way she'd charmed countless others before her curse. But all she could do was follow and wait for him to speak first, hoping he'd say something, anything, that she could use as a foundation for connection. One day, Narcissus got separated from his hunting companions in the dense forest. He called out, "Is anyone there?" An echo, hidden behind a tree, heart hammering with sudden opportunity, could only repeat, "There." Her voice emerged smaller than she intended, more desperate, but it was something, a beginning. Narcissus spun around, searching for the speaker. "Come to me," he commanded. An echo whispered back, "To me," emerging slightly from her hiding place, arms outstretched, hoping beyond hope that he'd understand, that he'd see past the strange repetition to the person underneath. But Narcissus saw a nymph he didn't recognize, speaking in bizarre fragments, approaching with grasping hands. He recoiled, his beautiful face twisting with revulsion. "I'd rather die than let you have me," he said coldly. The same rejection he'd given dozens of suitors, completely unaware that his words would be the last original ones Echo could ever direct at herself. "Have me," Echo repeated, and the words hung in the air like a prayer and a death sentence simultaneously. She reached for him, trying to convey through gesture what her broken voice couldn't express. But Narcissus turned and walked away without looking back, leaving her alone in the forest with his rejection echoing in her mouth forever. The quirky detail some sources mention: Echo didn't die immediately from heartbreak like you might expect in these stories. Instead, she wasted away slowly, her body gradually disappearing while her consciousness remained, grief literally consuming her physical form. Her flesh melted from her bones themselves turned to stone and merged with the mountain. Eventually nothing remained but her voice, doomed to repeat the last words spoken to her for eternity. That's the Echo you know now, not a person but a phenomenon, a voice without a body, consciousness without form, the ultimate reduction of a person to their most basic function. When you shout into a canyon and hear your words bounce back, that's Echo, still cursed, still repeating, still unable to say anything original, still heartbroken over a beautiful young man who couldn't love her, because he couldn't love anyone, including himself. And the cruelest part? She had to watch what happened next. Voiceless and bodiless, she haunted the forest where Narcissus wandered, and she was there when he found the pool. She saw him kneel, saw him fall in love with his reflection, saw him start to waste away exactly as she had wasted, dying of unrequited love just like the suitors he'd rejected. She must have felt some satisfaction. The universe was finally teaching him what rejection felt like, but also overwhelming sadness, because despite everything, she still loved him. She called to him sometimes, other nymphs said. When Narcissus spoke to his reflection saying, "I love you," to the water, Echo's voice would drift from the rocks, "I love you." When he cried, "Why do you torture me?" her voice answered, "Torture me." She was still trying to communicate, still trying to reach him through the only means available, but Narcissus never understood. He thought the forest itself was sympathizing with his plight, never realized it was a heartbroken nymph who died for love of him. The ancient Greeks paired these stories because they illustrate different kinds of isolation. Endymion, that's you, remember, still sleeping on Mount Latmos while we tell these other tales. You're isolated by unconsciousness, cut off from the waking world by divine decree. Narcissus is isolated by perfection, so beautiful that genuine connection becomes impossible. And Echo is isolated by her inability to speak, trapped in consciousness without the tools to make herself understood. All three of you are alone in ways that seem almost designed to maximize suffering, each separated from the world by different mechanisms but achieving the same essential result: unreachable, unknowable, fundamentally cut off from the kind of mutual recognition that makes existence bearable. Do you dream about Echo sometimes, Endymion, in that cave on Mount Latmos? Do the daughters of Hypnos weave her into your sleeping narratives, a woman who can only repeat your dream words back to you, offering connection that's really just reflection, relationship that's actually just solitary echo bouncing off stone walls? Narcissus dies eventually. Not quickly. The gods rarely grant quick deaths when slow ones make better stories, but inevitably. He grows weaker by the pool, his body consuming itself, his beauty transforming from vibrant to ethereal to ghostly. He whispers final words to his reflection, "Farewell," and somewhere in the rocks, Echo's voice repeats it back, "Farewell." Then his eyes close for the last time, and his spirit descends to the underworld, where, according to some accounts, he continues staring at his reflection in the river Styx, unable to break the habit even in death. But his body doesn't rot into the earth like normal mortal remains. When the nymphs come to prepare him for burial, they find instead a flower growing where he died, white petals surrounding a golden centre, bending toward the water as though still trying to glimpse that impossible beloved. We call them narcissus flowers now, or daffodils, and they still grow near water, still bow their heads like they're looking at something just out of reach. Every spring they return, which makes them both a symbol of rebirth and a reminder that some prisons outlast death itself. Let's leave that pool and its flowers behind, descend into darker territory, literally darker, because we're going underground now, following a musician whose love story makes even Narcissus's solitary obsession look almost healthy by comparison. His name is Orpheus, and his music could make stones weep, trees uproot themselves to follow him, rivers change course just to hear one more note. You've heard of him, probably, even in your dreams, the greatest musician who ever lived, the man whose lyre was gift from Apollo himself, whose voice could charm literally anything. Orpheus was married to Eurydice, a woman whose beauty was considerable but whose defining characteristic was being loved by Orpheus, which tells you something about how these stories treat female characters. The myths don't give us much about her personality, her desires, her inner life. She exists primarily as the object of Orpheus's devotion, the prize he'll risk everything to reclaim, which is romantically tragic if you don't think about it too hard and kind of troubling if you do. They are happy, these two, in the uncomplicated way myth allows before tragedy strikes. They walk through meadows holding hands. They sang together, his voice trained and powerful, hers presumably lovely enough to complement his. They planned futures that assumed time would continue normally, that death was a distant concern, that love could exist without divine interference or cosmic consequence. Then a satyr, one of those half-goat creatures always causing problems in Greek myths, saw Eurydice and wanted her. He chased her through the forest, and she ran, looking back over her shoulder instead of watching where her feet landed. She stepped on a viper hidden in the grass, and its fangs sank into her ankle, pumping venom that worked faster than love or music or desperate prayers to uncaring gods. Eurydice died quickly, probably. Snake venom kills efficiently, and these myths don't linger on medical details. One moment she was running, alive, terrified, but present. The next she was gone, her spirit already descending to the underworld, joining the endless grey crowds of the dead who shuffle through Hades's kingdom like autumn leaves blown by wind that never stops. Orpheus's grief was absolute. Historians still argue whether his response represents the pinnacle of romantic devotion or a kind of magnificent selfishness. He couldn't accept her death not because she deserved life, but because he couldn't bear the absence, the silence where her voice used to be. He wandered through the world, playing songs so sad that rivers flooded from the tears of nymphs listening, that flowers wilted in sympathy, that even the sun supposedly dimmed slightly, though that might be poetic exaggeration. But grief alone doesn't change death's mathematics. Mourning doesn't resurrect. So Orpheus did something almost unprecedented in Greek mythology. He decided to go get her back. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, but literally. He would descend to the underworld, find Eurydice among the dead, and bring her home through sheer force of music and will and refusal to accept reality's boundaries. The entrance to Hades was located at various places depending on which ancient source you trust. Some said Tinarum in southern Greece, others claimed certain caves in Thrace. Orpheus found one, because heroes always do when mythology needs them to, and he began his descent into darkness so complete it made midnight look bright by comparison. You'd understand this journey, maybe, sleeping Endymion. You descend into unconsciousness every night, or rather, you're stuck in one continuous descent, falling through layers of dream that never reach bottom. Orpheus descended through actual geography, through caves that twisted deeper and deeper, through air that grew cold and thin, past warnings carved in stone that promised death to living intruders. The quirky detail. Orpheus was one of the few mortals to make this journey and survive. Most who entered Hades as living beings either stayed dead or came back transformed in uncomfortable ways. Theseus and Pirithous tried once, got stuck to chairs of forgetfulness, needed Heracles to rescue them. Heracles himself descended to capture Cerberus as one of his labours, but Orpheus went alone, armed only with his lyre, protected only by his grief and his absolutely unreasonable determination. He passed Cerberus, the three-headed dog guarding the gates, by playing music so beautiful the beast fell asleep, all three heads drooping simultaneously. He crossed the river Styx, where the ferryman Charon normally demanded payment, a coin placed in the mouth of the dead, but Orpheus played a song about loss and longing, and even Charon's ancient heart softened enough to grant passage. The underworld stretched before him, vast and grey and hopeless. Shades of the dead drifted past without seeing him, caught in their own eternal monotony. The fields of Asphodel spread in all directions, where the ordinary dead spent eternity doing nothing in particular, conscious but barely, existing but not really living. It's the Greek version of hell, not torture exactly, but endless meaningless existence, consciousness without purpose, time without end or variation. And Orpheus walked through it all, playing his lyre, heading for the throne room where Hades and Persephone ruled over the dead with authority absolute and utterly indifferent to mortal suffering. He was going to ask the impossible, demand the unprecedented, beg the rulers of death itself to make an exception for love. The arrogance is breathtaking when you think about it. Death is the one absolute democracy. Everyone goes, no exceptions, no bargaining. Kings and beggars, heroes and cowards, everyone ends up as shades in Hades eventually. But Orpheus looked at this fundamental law of existence and said, "Not for Eurydice, not for my wife, not while I can still play music and refuse to accept reality." You might admire his devotion, or find it somewhat selfish. He's disrupting the cosmic order, demanding special treatment, assuming his love matters more than everyone else's loss. Every person in Hades lost someone. Every shade down there was mourned by somebody. But only Orpheus had the combination of talent, grief, and sheer audacity to storm Death's kingdom and demand a refund. Word count was just 256, Let me continue to reach the target length. He reached the throne room finally, where Hades sat in dark majesty and Persephone, who knew something about being taken from the world above, watched with eyes that had seen every variation of human sorrow. Orpheus didn't wait for permission to speak. He lifted his lyre and began to play a song about love and loss, about spring flowers and winter graves, about the specific shape of Eurydice's smile, and the exact texture of silence when beloved voices go quiet forever. The music filled that vast space, and something unprecedented happened. The eternally tortured paused in their torment. Tantalus forgot his unreachable fruit. Sisyphus let his boulder roll back down. The Danaids stopped trying to fill their broken vessels. Even the Furies wept, those ancient goddesses of vengeance who knew only anger and punishment, tears streaming down their terrible faces as Orpheus played. Hades himself felt something move at his chest, some long dormant emotion stirring like a sleeper waking. And Persephone, remembering her own abduction, her own forced separation from everything she loved, put her hand on her husband's arm and whispered something only he could hear. The god of death raised his hand for silence, and Orpheus's music trailed into quiet. The petition hadn't even been spoken aloud yet, but Hades already knew what was being asked, and against all precedent, against the fundamental rules of existence, he was considering saying yes. Hades speaks, and his voice sounds like earth settling over coffins, like the final breath leaving dying lungs, like the absolute certainty of endings. Orpheus, he says, and even speaking the name feels like a concession, acknowledging this mortal as someone worth addressing directly. Your music moves even stone hearts. Your grief is noted. The god pauses, and you can almost hear him thinking, calculating, deciding how much mercy he can afford without destabilizing the entire cosmic order. Persephone leans close, whispering again, and Hades' expression, if a god of death can be said to have expressions, softens microscopically. He's going to grant the request. Against all precedent, against the fundamental rules that govern existence, he's going to let Eurydice leave. But gods never give gift without conditions, never grant wishes without embedding hooks that might tear everything apart later. You may take Eurydice back to the living world, Hades announces, and Orpheus's heart leaps so violently he nearly drops his lyre. She will follow you up through the passages to the surface, but, and here it comes, the condition that transforms mercy into test, gift into trap. You must not look back at her, not once, not until you both stand in sunlight again, fully return to the world above. If you turn to verify she's following, she returns to me forever. It seems simple enough, doesn't it? Just walk forward, trust that she's there, maintain faith for the length of time it takes to climb from Hades to the living world. Orpheus agrees immediately, desperately, gratitude pouring from him in words that tumble over each other. He'd agree to anything right now, promise anything, accept any condition that returns Eurydice to him. Hades gestures, and Eurydice's shade appears, pale, translucent, still bearing the mark of snakebite on her ankle. She looks confused, uncertain, barely conscious in the way the dead are barely conscious, existing more than living. Does she even understand what's happening? The myths don't say. They're focused on Orpheus, on his quest, his devotion, his coming failure. Eurydice remains voiceless, a prize being transferred from death to life, her own desires or fears or hopes never quite making it onto the page. Orpheus turns toward the exit, and behind him, he must assume, he must trust. Eurydice begins following. The journey back starts in complete silence except for his footsteps and the soft sounds of his lyre, which he plays quietly, partly to comfort himself and partly to demonstrate faith, to fill the silence that might otherwise drive him mad with doubt. Historians still argue whether Hades' condition was cruel test or reasonable precaution. Some scholars suggest the rule existed to maintain cosmic balance. Death can't be too easy to escape, or everyone would try it. Others read it as a philosophical examination of trust and faith, a question about whether love can exist without constant verification and proof. A few interpretative souls claim it's about control, about Orpheus's need to possess rather than to trust, his journey representing masculine anxiety about feminine autonomy. The passages stretch long and dark and endlessly upward. Orpheus climbs, his legs burning from effort, his lungs aching in the thin air. He plays his lyre constantly now, filling the silence with music because if he stops playing, he'll start thinking. And if he starts thinking, he'll start doubting. And if he starts doubting, he'll turn around to check. Behind him, supposedly, theoretically, he hopes desperately. Eurydice follows, but she makes no sound. The dead don't breathe heavily from exertion, don't scuff their feet on stone, don't mutter complaints about steep climbs. She's absolutely silent, which means Orpheus has no auditory confirmation she's actually there. He's operating purely on faith, trusting that Hades kept his word, that his wife follows invisibly, that this isn't an elaborate divine joke with him climbing alone while Eurydice remains in the underworld, wondering where her husband went. The doubt creeps in like cold water seeping through stone. Is she really there? Did Hades actually release her, or was the whole thing mockery, the gods amusing themselves with mortal desperation? Maybe she's following but too far behind. Maybe she's slow, confused, her shade legs unable to keep pace with his living ones. Maybe she needs help, stumbled and fell, and even now lies injured on the path while he climbs obliviously upward. Or maybe, and this is the thought that really poisons his mind, maybe she doesn't want to return. Maybe death offered her peace, release from mortal concerns, and resurrection means returning to a world of pain and eventual death again. Maybe she's hanging back deliberately, hoping he'll fail this test, hoping to remain in Hades' grey quiet rather than face the complicated mess of living. Orpheus's breath comes faster, not from physical exertion, but from rising panic. The silence behind him feels enormous, accusatory, heavy with absence. He plays his lyre more frantically, trying to create sound enough to drown out doubt, but it's not working. The uncertainty is becoming unbearable, physically painful, like a wound that won't stop bleeding. He can see light ahead now, not sunlight yet, but the grey suggestion of approaching surface, the sense that the underworld is thinning, that reality is close. He's almost there, almost successful, almost home with his wife restored. Just a few more minutes of faith, of trust, of walking forward without verification. But here's what the myths understand about human nature, about the psychology of impossible tasks. Sometimes the closer you get to success, the more unbearable the anxiety becomes. When failure meant everything was lost anyway, maintaining hope felt easier. Now that success is nearly achieved, the fear of losing it at the last moment becomes crushing, overwhelming, impossible to resist. The quirky detail some versions mention. Orpheus heard something behind him, a stumble, a small cry of pain, Eurydice's voice calling his name. Other versions insist he heard nothing, that the silence itself became too much to bear. That absence of proof felt worse than confirmed loss. Either way, The result is the same. 3 steps from sunlight, from success, from happily ever after, Orpheus turns around. He sees her, finally. Eurydice is there, actually there, following exactly as promised, her shade form already starting to solidify into flesh as they approach the living world. For one brief moment their eyes meet, and he sees recognition, maybe love, maybe reproach. It's hard to say because the moment lasts only a heartbeat, before Hades's condition activates with the mechanical precision of divine law. Eurydice begins to fade, not walking backwards, not turning to descend again, just dissolving like morning mist when the sun hits it, becoming translucent, then transparent, then gone. She reaches for him, or seems to reach, her hand extending in a gesture that might be accusation or forgiveness or simple goodbye. But she's already too insubstantial to touch. Her mouth moves, forming words Orpheus will spend the rest of his life trying to decipher from memory, but no sound emerges. Then she's gone. Completely. Orpheus stands alone on the threshold between death and life, 3 steps from salvation, holding nothing but empty air and the certainty of his catastrophic failure. He tries to run back down, to chase after her, to beg Hades for another chance, but the passages have closed behind him. Once was unprecedented. Twice is impossible. The rules of existence have flexed as far as they're going to flex, and now they snap back into place with absolute finality. Orpheus emerges into sunlight alone, and the world has never seemed emptier. The music that charmed Hades, that made stones weep and rivers change course, now sounds hollow in his own ears, like playing notes he no longer understands. He's lost Eurydice twice now, once to snakebite, and once to his own inability to trust, to have faith, to walk forward without looking back. The ancient Greeks loved this story because it asks uncomfortable questions about love and control, about whether trust is possible when stakes are existential, about how sometimes the actions we take to preserve what we love destroy it instead. Orpheus loved Eurydice enough to storm death itself, but not enough to trust she was following. His devotion was absolute, but his faith was insufficient. And the difference between those two things, devotion and faith, love and trust, is exactly 3 steps. The distance between success and failure. The space where everything falls apart. Do you dream about this sometimes, Endymion, in your eternal sleep? Do the daughters of Hypnos weave Orpheus's tragedy into your unconscious narratives, showing you what happens when people who love you can't let go, can't trust, can't accept, that love sometimes means releasing control? Orpheus eventually dies. The myths offer various endings, most of them violent, all of them tinged with the sense that he's been half dead since losing Eurydice anyway. But let's leave his grief behind and turn to another impossible love story. Another mortal caught in divine machinations. Her name is Psyche, which literally means soul in Greek, and her story begins with a beauty problem that should sound familiar by now. She's so lovely that people stop worshipping Aphrodite and start worshipping her instead, which is approximately the worst possible situation when you're mortal and the goddess of beauty has a temper like a wounded cat. You lie there sleeping on Mount Latmos while Psyche grows up in a palace that's become her prison, surrounded by admirers who worship from a distance but never actually propose marriage. She's too beautiful, you see. Men are intimidated, afraid to approach someone who looks like she should be carved in marble on a temple roof, rather than walking around having normal conversations. Her sisters marry kings and princes, ordinary beautiful women finding ordinary happy endings, while Psyche sits alone in her extraordinary beauty, untouched and increasingly desperate. Her father consults an oracle, because that's what you do when you're an ancient king with a problem you don't understand. The oracle, speaking for Apollo, who speaks for fate, who speaks for the complicated machinations of divine politics, delivers a prophecy that's designed to sound like a death sentence. Psyche must be abandoned on a mountaintop dressed in funeral garments where a monster will come to claim her as his bride. Imagine hearing that. Imagine being told your beauty has condemned you to marriage with something terrible, that your loveliness has attracted attention from creatures that shouldn't want mortal wives. Psyche accepts her fate with the kind of resignation myth requires from its heroines, and her family carries her to the appointed mountain, weeping like she's already dead, leaving her alone on a rocky crag with wind pulling at her funeral dress. But here's where the story swerves, because the monster is actually Eros, Cupid in the Roman telling, the god of love himself, who's been manipulated into this situation by his mother Aphrodite's jealousy. Aphrodite wanted Eros to make Psyche fall in love with something hideous as punishment for daring to be beautiful. Instead, Eros saw Psyche and accidentally pricked himself with his own arrow, which is either deeply ironic or exactly what you'd expect from a god whose entire job is love but who's never experienced it himself. So Eros arranges for the wind to carry Psyche from that desolate crag to a magnificent palace that appears out of nowhere, all marble columns and golden fountains and luxuries beyond imagining. Invisible servants attend her, voices without bodies offering food and comfort. And at night, in complete darkness, her new husband comes to her bed, speaking in voices that sound young and kind, touching her with hands that feel gentle rather than monstrous. He makes one request, one single condition. She must never try to see his face, never light a lamp, never look at him. He'll visit every night, be her husband in darkness, but if she ever glimpses him in light, he'll be forced to leave forever. Historians still argue whether this represents ancient anxieties about arranged marriage, the fear of being bound to someone you don't truly know, or philosophical questions about love and knowledge, whether you can genuinely love someone whose face you've never seen. Some feminist scholars read it as a story about feminine curiosity being punished, women being told to accept their lot without asking uncomfortable questions, the quirky detail. In some very early versions of this tale, the husband really was a monster, a serpent or dragon, making Psyche's trust genuinely terrifying rather than ultimately rewarded. But the version that survived emphasizes the irony. She's afraid of a monster and married to a god, terrified of ugliness while sleeping beside absolute beauty. Psyche lives in this strange paradise for weeks or months, happy in some ways. Her husband is kind, the palace is comfortable, the invisible servants anticipate her every need. But she's also profoundly lonely, cut off from her family, spending her days alone and her nights with someone she can touch but never truly know. She asks her husband if her sisters could visit, just to assure them she's alive and well, and he agrees reluctantly, warning her that her sisters will bring trouble, that family often ruins happiness when happiness doesn't match their expectations. He's right, naturally. The sisters visit carried by that same convenient wind, and they see the palace, the luxury, the evidence of Psyche's inexplicable good fortune. Envy creeps into their hearts like poison, because how is it fair that their sister, abandoned to die, ended up in circumstances vastly better than their own royal marriages? They begin asking pointed questions about her husband. What does he look like? What does he do during the day? Why all this secrecy? Psyche admits she's never seen him, and her sisters pounce on this admission like cats on a wounded bird. He must be hiding something terrible, they whisper. The oracle said a monster, remember? He's probably hideous, probably planning to devour you once you're fattened up with luxury, probably a serpent or dragon who'll unhinge his jaw and swallow you whole. The image is vivid enough to plant deep roots of doubt. Psyche's happiness suddenly feels fragile, built on ignorance, potentially dangerous. Her sisters leave her a lamp and a knife. Light the lamp while he sleeps, they advise. If he's a monster, use the knife. Better to know the truth and act than to die in ignorant bliss. That night, Psyche lies awake beside her husband, feeling his breathing slow into sleep, the lamp and knife hidden beneath her side of the bed. She's terrified and determined in equal measure, hands shaking as she lights the lamp and lifts it high to finally see what she's been touching in darkness all these weeks. The lamplight falls on the most beautiful face she's ever seen. Not a monster at all, but a god, young and perfect, wings folded against his back like a swan's, beauty so absolute it makes her gasp. This is Eros, love personified, and she's been sleeping beside him without knowing, fearing monstrosity while sharing a bed with divinity. She leans closer, drinking in details, the curve of his lips, the sweep of his eyelashes, the way his hair curls at his temples. She's so absorbed in looking that she doesn't notice the lamp tilting, doesn't register the danger until a drop of hot oil falls from the flame and lands on Eros's bare shoulder. He wakes with a cry of pain and betrayal. Their eyes meet. Her first time seeing his face clearly, his first time seeing her with full knowledge of her disobedience, and his expression breaks her heart. Not anger exactly, but profound disappointment, the look of someone whose trust has been violated in the exact way they feared most. Love cannot live without trust, he says, or something similar. The exact words vary by translation, but the sentiment remains constant. Then his wings unfold, and he's gone, flying out the window, leaving Psyche alone in the palace that's already starting to fade around her. The invisible servants growing silent, the luxury dissolving like it was never real. Psyche stands there holding the lamp and the unused knife, realizing she's just destroyed her own happiness through curiosity and distrust, through listening to voices that spoke from envy rather than love, through needing to verify rather than accept. The palace vanishes completely, and she finds herself alone on a hillside wearing only her nightdress, the lamp extinguished in her hand. Everything good in her life evaporated like the oil from that lamp, leaving only the smell of smoke and regret. Continuing to reach target. She could give up here, accept the loss, return to her father's palace in shame. But Psyche discovers something about herself in this moment of abandonment. She's not just beautiful, she's stubborn. She made a mistake, violated trust, listened to the wrong voices, but she's not ready to accept that one error means permanent loss. If Orpheus could storm the underworld for love, surely she can find some way to win back a god who once loved her enough to defy his own mother. So begins Psyche's real story, the part where she transforms from passive princess to active heroine, where her beauty becomes less important than her determination, where she learns that reclaiming lost love requires more than regret. It requires impossible tasks accomplished through sheer refusal to give up. Psyche wanders the earth searching for Eros, visiting temple after temple, begging gods and goddesses for information, for help, for any clue about how to fix what she's broken. Most ignore her. Divine beings rarely involve themselves in the romantic complications of other gods, especially when Aphrodite's involved. The goddess of beauty has a long memory and a vindictive streak, and helping Psyche would earn her eternal enmity. Finally, Psyche realizes she has no choice but to approach Aphrodite directly, to throw herself on the mercy of the goddess who wanted her destroyed in the first place. It's either incredibly brave or monumentally stupid, possibly both simultaneously, but desperation makes cowards into heroes and fools into risk-takers. She presents herself at Aphrodite's temple, kneeling in supplication, and the goddess's laughter echoes through marble halls like breaking glass. "So," Aphrodite says, circling Psyche like a predator examining prey, "the mortal girl who dared steal my son wants forgiveness. You had everything, a divine husband, a magical palace, eternal comfort, and you threw it away because you couldn't follow one simple rule. Why should I help you?" Her voice drips with satisfaction, the pleasure of watching someone who challenged her now grovelling for assistance. Psyche has no good answer, nothing except desperate love and willingness to do whatever it takes. And Aphrodite, being a goddess who understands drama, decides to make a game of it. She'll give Psyche tasks, impossible challenges designed to break her spirit or kill her outright. If Psyche somehow survives and succeeds, Aphrodite will consider reuniting her with Eros. Maybe, possibly, no promises. The first task sounds deceptively simple. Sort a massive pile of mixed seeds, wheat, barley, millet, poppy, chickpeas, lentils, into separate heaps by morning. Aphrodite dumps these seeds in a huge mound, millions of individual grains all jumbled together, and leaves Psyche alone in a locked room with the assignment. It's impossible, obviously. A human lifetime wouldn't be enough time to sort that many seeds by hand, let alone a single night. Psyche stares at the pile with despair rising in her throat. This is designed to be impossible, a task given not to test her, but to prove her inadequacy, to demonstrate that mortals can't accomplish what gods demand. She could start sorting and die of old age before making visible progress. The seeds blur before her vision, countless and identical, mocking her with their abundance. But here's where something interesting happens, something that historians still argue about in terms of what it means symbolically. Ants arrive, thousands of them, maybe millions, streaming through cracks in the walls like a miniature army. They organize themselves with the kind of efficiency that only colony insects can achieve, each ant selecting a seed and carrying it to the appropriate pile. They work through the night with mechanical precision, and by morning the task is complete. Every grain sorted, separated, arranged in perfect heaps according to type. Did the ants act on their own, taking pity on Psyche? Did Eros, still watching despite his hurt, secretly intervene? Did the universe itself recognize something worth preserving in Psyche's stubborn refusal to give up? The myths don't explain the ants' motivation, just report their assistance, leaving interpretation open. Aphrodite returns at dawn, expecting to find Psyche collapsed in tears beside an unsorted pile. Instead, she sees the completed task, and her eyes narrow with suspicion and renewed determination. "Someone helped you," she accuses, though she has no proof, and Psyche wisely stays silent. "Fine, let's see you handle this next challenge alone." The second task is more dangerous. Retrieve golden fleece from a flock of violent man-eating sheep that graze in a meadow beyond a river. These aren't normal sheep. They're sacred to the sun god. Their wool literally glows with stolen sunlight, and they attack any human who approaches, trampling and goring with horns sharp as spears. Psyche is supposed to cross the river, approach these murderous animals, and return with their fleece intact. She stands on the riverbank watching the sheep in the distance, seeing how they move in aggressive patterns, how their horns catch the light like weapons. This task isn't just impossible, it's suicidal. Aphrodite is essentially sending her to die while maintaining plausible deniability, framing murder as a challenge. But as Psyche contemplates wading into the river and accepting her probable death, a green reed growing at the water's edge begins to whisper in a voice like wind through grass. Don't approach the sheep during the day, it advises. Wait until evening when they rest in shade, then gather the fleece they've left snagged on thorns and brambles throughout the meadow. You don't need to confront them directly, just collect what they've already shed. The quirky detail some versions mention. These talking reeds were actually river nymphs in disguise, or possibly the spirit of the river itself, taking pity on a mortal girl caught in divine politics. Either way, the natural world keeps intervening on Psyche's behalf, suggesting that even voiceless creation recognizes something worth saving in her determination. Psyche waits until evening as instructed, watches the sheep settle into drowsy contentment, then creeps through the meadow collecting bits of golden fleece from every thorn bush and bramble. The sheep ignore her, too comfortable and full to bother with a quiet intruder. She returns to Aphrodite with an armful of glowing wool, and the goddess's smile turns sharp and cold. Impressive, Aphrodite says in a tone that suggests the opposite. But I have a third task for you, and this one allows no clever shortcuts. She hands Psyche a crystal flask. See that mountain peak where black water flows from the rocks? That's the river Styx, the boundary between life and death, guarded by dragons and impossible to approach. Fill this flask and return it to me. The river Styx. Do you remember it, Endymion? From dreams, perhaps? The river Orpheus crossed to reach Hades, the water that grants invulnerability but also marks the absolute boundary between mortal and divine realms. It flows from rocks so high and treacherous that even gods hesitate to approach, and it's protected by serpents whose poison can kill with a glance. Psyche climbs for days, her hands bleeding from sharp rocks, her lungs burning in the thin mountain air. She reaches the precipice where the Styx emerges, black water tumbling over stone, and she sees immediately why this task is impossible. The rocks are sheer cliffs, unclimbable. The dragons coil in the crevices, watching with eyes like dying suns. There's no path forward, no clever solution, no way to accomplish what Aphrodite demands without divine intervention. She sits on the rock, exhausted and defeated, wondering if this is finally where her story ends, not in triumph or tragedy, but in simple failure, unable to proceed, too stubborn to turn back. Then a shadow falls across her, enormous and unexpected. She looks up to see an eagle, Zeus's own bird, descending from the sky, with wings that span wider than her outstretched arms. The eagle takes the flask in its talons without speaking. Zeus's creatures don't explain themselves, and flies directly to the source of the Styx, unbothered by dragons or impossible geography. It fills the flask with black water and returns, dropping it carefully into Psyche's hands before flying away without acknowledgement, like this intervention was simply a task to be completed rather than a miracle to be celebrated. Historians still argue whether Zeus himself sent the eagle, whether Eros was secretly orchestrating these rescues, or whether Psyche's persistence had earned the respect of the cosmos itself. The myths suggest that the universe sometimes rewards stubbornness, that refusing to give up can create its own kind of magic, that doors open for people who keep walking toward them even when walking seems pointless. Psyche returns with the flask of Styx water, and Aphrodite's expression darkens with genuine anger now. 3 impossible tasks completed. 3 times the mortal girl should have failed or died, and 3 times she's returned successful. The goddess is running out of ways to destroy her without being obvious about it. running out of tasks that seem like tests rather than assassination attempts. "One more," Aphrodite says, and her voice has gone cold as winter stone. "One final task, and if you complete it, I'll consider your debt paid. The final task is the cruelest, the most dangerous, the one designed not just to kill Psyche, but to damn her in the process." Aphrodite hands her an ornate box, beautifully carved, sealed with wax that smells faintly of roses and rot. "Take this to the underworld," the goddess commands, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. "Find Persephone, queen of the dead, and ask her to place a bit of her beauty in this box. Tell her Aphrodite requires it for divine purposes. Return the sealed box to me, and your tasks will be complete." You understand what this means, sleeping Endymion. Psyche must make the journey Orpheus made, descend to Hades itself, walk among the dead while still living, and somehow return. Except Orpheus had his music to charm his way past guardians, had divine heritage in some versions, had the advantage of being a hero rather than a mortal girl with no special abilities except stubborn refusal to give up. Psyche climbs a tall tower, thinking she'll throw herself off and take the quick route to the underworld via death, which is practical if deeply sad. But as she stands on the edge, preparing to jump, the tower itself begins to speak, because apparently everything in Greek mythology eventually talks, offering advice to suffering mortals. "Don't jump," the tower says in a voice like grinding stone. "I'll tell you how to reach Hades and return alive." The tower provides detailed instructions with the specificity of a divine GPS system. Find a certain cave in Laconia, bring 2 coins for Charon the ferryman, 1 for the journey down, 1 for the return trip. Bring 2 honey cakes to distract Cerberus, the 3-headed guard dog. When old men beg for help loading their donkey, ignore them. When drowning voices cry for rescue from the river, walk past. When the women weaving beg for assistance, refuse. These are tests, distractions designed to trap the sympathetic, to make you use up your coins or cakes or waste time until you're stuck in Hades forever. And crucially, vitally, desperately important, when Persephone gives you the box of beauty, don't open it. Don't even peek inside. Don't let curiosity or vanity tempt you to sample divine beauty for yourself. Just carry the sealed box back to the surface and deliver it to Aphrodite. Psyche follows these instructions with the grim determination of someone who's already completed 3 impossible tasks and refuses to fail the 4th. She finds the cave, descends into darkness that swallows light like water, swallows stones, approaches the river Styx with her coins clutched tight. Charon ferries her across without comment. The dead pay for passage, and she's paid, so what does it matter if she's still breathing? She passes Cerberus by throwing honey cakes to all 3 heads simultaneously, keeping them occupied while she slips past. She walks through the fields of asphodel where shades drift like leaves, ignoring their whispered pleas for news from the living world, for messages carried back, for any scrap of connection to the life they've lost. The throne room of Hades appears before her, vast and dark and cold with the chill of eternal endings. Persephone sits beside her husband, and her expression when she sees Psyche is complicated, pity mixed with recognition, understanding tinged with warning. She knows about impossible tasks and divine cruelty. This goddess who was once a mortal girl stolen from spring meadows and forced into an underworld marriage. She recognizes a kindred spirit in Psyche, another woman caught in the machinations of greater powers. "Aphrodite sent you," Persephone says, and it's not a question. She knows the goddess of beauty's patterns, has watched her cruelty play out across centuries. She opens the box Psyche brought. places something inside, some essence of underworld beauty perhaps, some fragment of the dark allure that makes Persephone queen of death, and seals it again with fingers that have grown accustomed to ruling over endings. "Return to the living," Persephone says, handing back the box. "And Psyche? Don't open this. Whatever temptation you feel, resist it. The contents aren't meant for mortal eyes or mortal use." Her voice carries weight, authority, genuine concern, which makes what happens next even more tragic. Psyche makes the return journey successfully, navigating past all the tests and traps, using her second coin to cross the Styx again, climbing back towards sunlight with the sealed box held carefully in both hands. She's going to succeed, going to complete the fourth impossible task, going to win back Eros and prove herself worthy of divine love. But as she climbs the final passages toward the surface, sunlight visible ahead, a thought creeps into her mind like poison seeping through cracks. She's exhausted, filthy, worn down by impossible tasks and divine cruelty. She's about to face Eros again after all this time, and she looks terrible, haggard, aged by stress, nothing like the beautiful girl he fell in love with. Wouldn't it be wise to borrow just a tiny bit of Persephone's beauty, just enough to look presentable, to be worthy of a god's attention again? Historians still argue whether this moment represents Psyche's fatal flaw or entirely human vulnerability, whether her mistake is vanity or insecurity, pride or self-doubt. She's been told her beauty caused all her problems. It attracted Aphrodite's jealousy, intimidated mortal suitors, led to her abandonment on that mountain. But she's also learned that beauty matters in this world, that appearance determines fate, that gods fall in love with surfaces before discovering depths. The quirky and rather dark detail. Some sources suggest the box doesn't contain beauty at all, but rather Stygian sleep, a fragment of death itself, the oblivion that lives in the underworld's heart. Persephone's beauty is dark beauty, the attractiveness of endings, the allure of rest and release, and never having to struggle again. Psyche opens the box, just a crack, just to peek inside and see what underworld beauty looks like. No light emerges, no glowing essence of divine loveliness. Instead, a vapour rises like smoke, like fog, like the breath of sleeping dragons, and it wraps around Psyche's face with the gentleness of a mother's hand closing a child's eyes at bedtime. She collapses where she stands, 3 steps from sunlight, the box tumbling from her hands. The sleep that claims her is profound, absolute, deeper than normal slumber, darker than simple unconsciousness. It's the sleep of death itself, the rest that has no waking, the kind of oblivion that makes your eternal slumber look active by comparison, Endymion. Do you sense her somehow, sleeping shepherd, one unconscious soul recognizing another across mythological distance? Do the daughters of Hypnos pause in weaving your dreams to acknowledge a mortal girl who's joined you in endless sleep? Though her slumber carries no dreams, no 50 daughters to keep her company, just vast and empty darkness. Psyche lies still on the threshold between Hades and the living world, neither fully dead nor meaningfully alive, trapped in the space between like so many figures in Greek mythology who pushed too hard, reached too far, couldn't quite resist the final temptation that destroyed everything they'd worked for. She completed 4 impossible tasks through cleverness and determination and cosmic intervention, survived challenges designed to kill her, earned the respect of the natural world and possibly the gods themselves, and then she opened a box she was explicitly told to leave sealed, doomed herself through the same inability to trust and obey that destroyed Orpheus's chance to reclaim Eurydice. The parallel is almost too perfect, too neat, suggesting that these myths are variations on a theme. Trust is hard. Following rules when you don't understand their purpose is nearly impossible, and the final test is often simply whether you can resist doing the one thing you've been warned against, even when that thing seems harmless or even wise. Psyche sleeps, and the box lies open beside her, having released its single exhalation of Stygian sleep. The vapour dissipates into ordinary air, leaving no trace except one unconscious girl, and another task failed at the very threshold of success. Another story about how the last step is always the hardest, how victory can evaporate between one breath and the next. But Psyche's story doesn't end in eternal sleep like yours does, Endymion. Eros has been watching, unable to stay away despite his hurt, despite his mother's machinations, despite the wound to his pride when Psyche lifted that lamp and broke his trust. He's been following her progress through the impossible tasks from a distance, half hoping she'll fail so he can stop loving her, half praying she'll succeed so he can justify taking her back. When he sees her collapse 3 steps from sunlight, the Stygian sleep wrapping around her like a burial shroud, something breaks in him, or perhaps something heals. He realizes that holding grudges is exhausting, that perfection isn't prerequisite for love, that Psyche has proven her devotion more thoroughly than most immortals ever prove anything. She walked through the underworld for him. She completed impossible tasks. She nearly died a dozen times rather than give up on reclaiming what they had. Eros descends from wherever he's been hiding. Olympus, probably, nursing his wounded feelings in his mother's palace while pretending not to care. His wings catch light as he drops to the cave floor beside Psyche's motionless form. He's still beautiful, this god, still young and perfect in the way that immortals are perfect. But there's something different in his expression now. Less petulance, more understanding, less divine arrogance, more recognition that love requires compromise, forgiveness, acceptance of imperfection. He gathers the Stygian sleep back into the box. It obeys him because everything connected to love eventually obeys the god of love and seals it properly. Then he wipes the remaining traces of sleep from Psyche's face with gentle fingers, and she wakes gasping like someone surfacing from deep water, her eyes flying open to see Eros kneeling beside her, with an expression that might be exasperation or affection, or both simultaneously. "You nearly had it," he says, and there's laughter in his voice, warm rather than mocking. 4 impossible tasks completed, and you couldn't resist opening the one box you were told to leave sealed. You're as bad at following instructions as I am at staying angry. Historians still argue whether this reunion represents genuine forgiveness, or simply Eros's inability to maintain standards, whether Psyche earned his love back through her trials, or whether he was always going to forgive her because gods are just as irrational and love-drunk as mortals. The myths don't provide psychological analysis, just report the outcome: reconciliation, restoration, the resumption of relationship. But Eros does something unprecedented then, something that transforms Psyche's story from tragedy to fairy tale, from cautionary parable to genuine romance. He brings her to Olympus, not sneaking her in, not hiding their relationship, but openly, defiantly, presenting her to Zeus himself and demanding that she be made immortal, so they can be together properly without the constant threat of mortality, age, and death hanging over their happiness. Zeus, who understands love's complications better than most, having caused approximately 1,000 of them, looks at young Eros defending his mortal bride and sees something worth preserving. Or maybe he's just amused or bored or feeling generous that particular afternoon. Divine motivation is always slightly opaque. Either way, he agrees. Psyche drinks ambrosia, the food of the gods, and feels mortality burning away like morning frost under sunlight. Her body transforms, becomes permanent rather than temporary, immune to age and death, and all the small degradations that make mortal existence precarious. She becomes a goddess, minor certainly, not one of the great Olympians, but immortal nonetheless, able to stand beside Eros without the constant awareness that she's dissolving toward death with every heartbeat. The quirky detail: some versions claim Psyche and Eros have a daughter named Hidone, goddess of pleasure, which makes a certain poetic sense. The child of soul and love would naturally embody joy, delight, the happiness that emerges when those two forces combine. Other versions skip the daughter entirely, focusing on the marriage itself as the happy ending, the point where story resolves into they lived forever after, because immortality makes happily ever after literally achievable. Aphrodite attends the wedding because she has to. It's held on Olympus after all, and refusing would be admitting defeat publicly. She smiles through gritted teeth, offers cold congratulations, and probably spends the entire feast plotting minor revenges that she'll never quite implement, because Zeus is watching, and even she knows when to accept loss gracefully, or at least pretend to. And Psyche, who started as a mortal girl too beautiful for her own good, who survived abandonment and impossible tasks and literal death's sleep, who proved that stubbornness and love can overcome divine cruelty and cosmic indifference, becomes the goddess of the soul itself. She represents the part of humans that persists, that refuses to give up, that keeps walking forward even when the path looks impossible. Her story offers hope that yours doesn't, Endymion. She was trapped, tested, nearly destroyed by forces beyond her control, but she fought back, reclaimed agency, transformed suffering into strength. Meanwhile, you sleep on Mount Latmos, never fighting, never choosing, never able to participate in your own story except as beautiful object, eternal prize, permanent prisoner of divine love that couldn't imagine any solution except to freeze you in place forever. The contrast is stark, almost painful. Psyche's trials made her immortal through her own efforts, through persistence and cleverness and refusal to surrender. Your immortality was imposed without consent, a gift that looks more like curse the longer you examine it, preservation that required your complete erasure as a conscious being. But perhaps that's the point of grouping these myths together, their variations on themes of love, control, transformation, and cost. Narcissus loved his own reflection into death. Echo loved Narcissus into dissolution. Orpheus loved Eurydice enough to storm the underworld, but not enough to trust she was following. Psyche loved Eros enough to complete impossible tasks, but not quite enough to leave sealed boxes sealed. And you, sleeping Endymion, you're loved by Selene so completely, so absolutely, that her love required your absence, your silence, your transformation from person into possession. Some loves destroy, some loves transform, some loves imprison while claiming to protect, and some loves, like Psyche and Eros eventually achieve, manage to find balance between desire and respect, possession and partnership. Though even those loves usually require divine intervention and cosmic exception-making to actually work. The ancient Greeks told these stories not to provide clear morals, but to map the complicated territory of human experience, the ways we hurt each other while claiming to care, the impossible choices that have no good outcomes, the moments when stubbornness becomes heroism, and when devotion curdles into selfishness. They understood that love is complicated, often painful, sometimes beautiful and frequently toxic, and that the difference between these states is often invisible from the inside, only becoming clear in retrospect when it's far too late to change the outcome. Do you dream about Psyche sometimes, in your eternal sleep? Do the daughters of Hypnos show you her story as contrast to your own, letting you experience vicariously what it feels like to fight for love rather than simply submit to it? Or do they protect you from such knowledge, keeping your dreams gentle and unchallenging, ensuring you never have to confront the difference between her story and yours, between active transformation and passive preservation? The myths don't say, because you can't report back, can't tell scholars what fills your sleeping mind, can't testify about whether imprisonment in dreams feels different from imprisonment in waking life. You're the ultimate silent witness, the beauty who never speaks, the beloved who never confirms or denies the love that's claimed him. And Selene continues her nightly visits, watching you sleep, running fingers through your unchanging hair, loving you with the kind of devotion that requires your complete absence to function, possessing you so thoroughly that you've become more concept than person, more symbol than self. Let's drift from Psyche's triumph and return to darker territory, to stories that resist happy endings, that embrace the strange and uncomfortable truths about transformation and knowledge and the prices we pay for understanding things we weren't meant to understand. There's a prophet named Tiresias whose story cuts through Greek mythology like a thread of quicksilver, appearing in countless other tales as the blind seer who knows too much, who's seen things from perspectives mortals shouldn't access. You sleep through all of this, Endymion, your dreams perhaps touching on Tiresias' story without ever fully grasping it, the way sleep sometimes brushes against waking knowledge without quite reaching it. Tiresias' tale begins with a simple walk through the forest, the kind of ordinary activity that mythology loves to transform into cosmic consequence. He's young then, just a regular person walking a regular path, when he stumbles across two snakes mating in the grass. Now most people would simply step around rutting serpents and continue walking. But Tiresias, for reasons the myths never quite explain, curiosity, disgust, simple impulse, strikes the snakes with his staff, separating them, interrupting their coupling. And the snakes, being sacred to Hera, being under divine protection, being essentially cosmic tripwires waiting for someone to stumble, transform him instantly and completely into a woman. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. Physically, totally, Tiresias goes from male to female in the span of a heartbeat, his body reshaping itself according to divine whim. Because gods can do that, can rewrite biology with the casual ease of authors editing sentences. He becomes she, and she spends the next 7 years living as a woman, experiencing the world from this new perspective, learning what it means to navigate existence in a different body, with different social expectations, different vulnerabilities, different strengths. Historians still argue about what this transformation represents symbolically. Some read it as exploration of gender fluidity, others as punishment for disturbing sacred acts, still others as the universe's way of creating someone uniquely qualified to understand both masculine and feminine experience. The ancient Greeks didn't have modern vocabulary around gender and identity, but they clearly found the concept fascinating, returning to it repeatedly in their myths. Then, 7 years later, Tiresias encounters two snakes mating again. Possibly the same pair, possibly different ones, the myths don't specify. And this time she deliberately strikes them with her staff, apparently testing whether the transformation can be reversed. It can. She becomes he again, returning to male form but now carrying 7 years of female experience. understanding both perspectives in ways that single-gendered beings never can. This dual knowledge eventually gets Tiresias involved in a divine argument, because the gods love dragging mortals into their petty disputes. Zeus and Hera are arguing, shocking I know given their famously terrible marriage, about whether men or women experience more pleasure during sex. It's the kind of argument that should probably remain theoretical, but Zeus remembers that Tiresias has lived as both man and woman, making him the only mortal qualified to answer definitively. They summon Tiresias to Olympus and he's trapped immediately. There's no good answer here, no diplomatic response that won't anger someone powerful. If he says men experience more pleasure, he insults Hera. If he says women do, he undermines Zeus. If he refuses to answer, he offends both. It's a perfect divine catch-22. The kind of impossible situation that gods find amusing and mortals find catastrophic. Tiresias answers honestly, because what else can he do when the king and queen of the gods demand truth? He says women experience 9 times more pleasure than men during sex, a specific ratio that suggests either genuine knowledge or excellent improvisation. The exact number varies by source, but the essential claim remains. Women enjoy sex significantly more than men do. Hera, enraged that her private experience has been revealed publicly, that her secrets have been spoken aloud by someone who shouldn't have access to them, strikes Tiresias blind. Not just darkness, but complete, permanent, irrevocable blindness, the kind that no mortal medicine can cure because it's imposed by divine will rather than physical damage. Zeus, feeling somewhat guilty that his curiosity led to Tiresias being punished for simply answering a question, tries to compensate. He can't restore Tiresias's sight, even the king of gods apparently can't override Hera's curses, but he grants prophetic vision instead, the ability to see future and past with perfect clarity, to understand fate's patterns, to know truths that transcend simple visual perception. The quirky detail. Some versions claim Tiresias also receives extraordinary long life, living through 7 generations, appearing in myth after myth as the blind prophet who warns heroes about their dooms, who explains mysteries, who knows everything worth knowing and wishes desperately he could unknow most of it. Because prophetic sight is its own kind of curse. Knowing the future means watching people walk toward disaster while being unable to prevent it, seeing tragedy approach with the slow inevitability of sunset. Tiresias appears throughout Greek mythology after this transformation. He tells Oedipus the terrible truth about his parentage, that he's married his mother, killed his father, fulfilled the prophecy he spent his life trying to avoid. He advises Odysseus on how to navigate the underworld, providing instructions for speaking with the dead. He warns Pentheus not to mock Dionysus, predicting the king's gruesome death at his own mother's hands. He knows everything, sees everything, and his knowledge helps almost no one because fate operates according to its own mathematics, indifferent to warnings and prophecies and desperate attempts to change predetermined outcomes. And even in death, Tiresias retains his prophetic gifts. When Odysseus visits the underworld seeking guidance for his journey home, Tiresias is one of the few shades who maintains full consciousness, who can speak and reason and provide genuine assistance rather than drifting mindlessly through asphodels like most of the dead. His blindness and his sight both persist beyond mortality, defining him so completely that even death can't strip away what makes him essentially himself. Do you understand this pattern now, sleeping Endymion? The myths keep circling back to vision and blindness, to knowledge and its costs, to seeing and being seen. Narcissus saw only his reflection and died from it. Echo was seen but couldn't speak. Orpheus looked back and lost everything. Psyche needed to see her husband's face and nearly destroyed their love. And Tiresias saw from perspectives he shouldn't access, answered questions he shouldn't answer, and traded physical sight for prophetic vision that showed him truths he probably wished he could unsee. You're blind too in your way, sleeping through existence with your eyes closed, never seeing Selene who watches over you, never witnessing the pilgrims who visit your cave, never observing the world changing around you. But unlike Tiresias, you have no compensating vision, no prophetic dreams that reveal truth. Your blindness is complete, absolute, offering nothing in exchange except preservation, safety, the dubious gift of never having to witness your own imprisonment. The ancient Greeks understood that sight is complicated, that seeing clearly can destroy you, that sometimes blindness offers protection from truths too painful to witness directly. They created myths about people who saw too much or too little, who looked when they should have trusted or trusted when they should have looked, mapping the impossible balance between knowledge and faith, between verification and acceptance. Tiresias lives for generations, blind and seeing, male and female, and somehow both and neither, accumulating knowledge that makes him invaluable to heroes and insufferable to himself. He can't enjoy simple pleasures because he knows how they'll end. He can't form attachments because he's already seen everyone's death. He can't hope because hope requires uncertainty, and he knows exactly how every story resolves. It's another kind of prison, this prophetic sight. Consciousness without the mercy of ignorance, knowledge without the comfort of doubt. At least you, sleeping shepherd, experience neither knowledge nor ignorance but something else entirely. Existence without awareness, being without consciousness, presence without participation. All these stories circle back to the same essential truth, the pattern that runs through Greek mythology like a golden thread through dark fabric. Transformation is inevitable, but the form it takes determines whether you emerge blessed or cursed, saved or destroyed, liberated or imprisoned. You lie there sleeping on Mount Latmos while these tales unfold across the ancient world, while lovers doom themselves and prophets trade sight for vision, and souls complete impossible tasks to prove devotion that should never require such proof. But there's one more figure we need to visit before we let you rest completely. One more god whose presence has haunted this entire journey, without being named directly until now. His name is Morpheus, and he's the god of dreams themselves, the one who shapes the visions that fill your endless sleep, the architect of every false life you've lived in unconsciousness. He's one of the oneiroi, the dream spirits, children of either Hypnos or Night depending on which source you trust, and his particular gift is the ability to take human form in dreams, to appear as loved ones, strangers, or heroes, making the sleeping mind believe completely in whatever narrative he's weaving. Morpheus visits everyone who sleeps, but he pays special attention to you, Endymion, because your sleep is his masterpiece, his magnum opus, his greatest and most sustained work. 50 daughters of Hypnos might weave your dreams, but Morpheus oversees the whole production, ensuring the narratives flow smoothly, that one dream transitions naturally into the next, that you never wake because the inconsistencies and impossibilities become too obvious. He's crafted thousands of lives for you by now, each one feeling absolutely real while you're experiencing it. In one dream, you're a powerful emperor conquering nations, making decisions that affect millions, and the weight of the crown on your head feels absolutely genuine. In another, you're a simple fisherman casting nets into an azure sea, And the salt spray on your face carries specific taste and texture, completely convincing. You've been merchant and soldier, poet and slave, king and beggar, living entire lifetimes in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Historians still argue whether dreams like yours constitute actual experience or simply elaborate hallucination, whether a life lived only in sleep counts as having been lived at all. If you experience joy in dreams, is that real joy? If you suffer, does the pain matter? If you love dream wives and raise dream children and build dream cities, have you actually accomplished anything? Or have you simply been very elaborately distracted from the fact that you're lying motionless in a cave, aging not at all, experiencing nothing real? Morpheus himself might not know the answer. He's a god of dreams, not philosophy, more concerned with craft than meaning, focused on creating convincing narratives rather than questioning whether those narratives constitute genuine existence. He visits your sleeping mind nightly, adjusting dreams like a gardener tending plants, pruning here, encouraging growth there, ensuring the overall garden of your unconscious remains lush and engaging. Sometimes he appears in your dreams as himself, a winged figure with features that shift and blur like reflections in disturbed water, never quite stable, always slightly wrong in ways that would alert a waking mind, but that sleeping consciousness accepts without question. He walks through your dream landscapes, observing his own work, occasionally tweaking details. That sunset seems a bit too vivid, unrealistic. This conversation needs better dialogue. That emotional climax lacks proper build-up. He's an artist perfecting his art, and you're simultaneously his canvas and his audience, experiencing his creations without ever consciously appreciating the craftsmanship involved. The quirky detail. Some sources claim Morpheus sometimes feels guilty about his role in your imprisonment, that he understands on some level that his beautiful dreams are also bars of your cage, that his skill at creating convincing false realities is precisely what makes your eternal sleep bearable, and therefore what makes it possible. Without his talent, you might have gone mad centuries ago, your mind fragmenting from endless unconsciousness. His gift keeps you sane, which means his gift keeps you trapped. The better he does his job, the more complete your prison becomes. Does he ever consider giving you nightmares instead? Crafting dreams so terrible, so obviously false, so horrifying that you might somehow fight your way toward consciousness, toward waking, toward escape. The myths don't say, but probably not. Morpheus is a god of dreams, not rebellion. He serves his function, provides his gift, creates his art. Questioning the ethics of eternal sleep isn't his responsibility. That's for mortals to wrestle with, for philosophers to debate, for poets to transform into metaphor. And Selene still visits, still kneels beside your sleeping form, still loves you with the kind of devotion that requires your complete absence. Does she ever speak to Morpheus? Do they coordinate? The goddess of the moon and the god of dreams, ensuring that your unconscious narratives include moonlight, that your dream lives always feature silver light filtering through windows, that even in sleep you're somehow connected to the goddess who doomed you to this existence. The myths don't explore their relationship, don't map the bureaucracy of your imprisonment. They focus on the image. Beautiful shepherd sleeping eternally, divine lover watching faithfully, time passing without effect. It's romantic if you don't think about it too hard, tragic if you do, and deeply unsettling if you think about it from your perspective, Endymion, assuming you still have a perspective, assuming the centuries of dreaming haven't completely dissolved whatever made you essentially yourself. Who are you now? after all this time? Are you still the shepherd who tended flocks on Mount Latmos, or have you become something else entirely? A consciousness that exists only in dream states, that has no stable identity because identity requires continuity, and you've lived 10,000 discontinuous lives, each one as real as the others, meaning none of them are real, meaning you're either everyone or no one, existing everywhere in dreams and nowhere in reality. Philosophy students still debate whether continuity of consciousness requires continuity of experience, whether you can remain yourself if your memories are constantly being overwritten with false ones, whether the you that fell asleep centuries ago bears any meaningful relationship to whatever consciousness currently inhabits your sleeping form. The answers matter less than the questions, honestly. The fact that we have to ask them at all reveals something uncomfortable about identity, memory, selfhood, and the fragile threads that hold personality together across time. Morpheus knows you better than anyone in some ways. He's witnessed every dream, crafted every narrative, seen you be 1,000 different people in 1,000 different situations. If anyone could say who you truly are beneath all those accumulated false lives, it would be him. But gods rarely share such insights, and Morpheus especially keeps his knowledge close, understanding that some truths are too heavy for mortal minds, or even immortal ones, to carry. The world outside your cave continues changing, oblivious to your sleep. Empires rise and crumble. Languages evolve beyond recognition. The gods themselves fade as worship shifts to new deities, new religions, new ways of understanding the divine. Eventually, even Selene's visits become less frequent, not because she loves you less, but because fewer people believe in her. Fewer voices call her name, and gods sustained by worship grow weak when worship ends. But you sleep on, because Zeus's gift doesn't depend on belief or worship or anything except the fundamental bargain struck millennia ago. You'll sleep until the mountains crumble to dust, until the seas boil away, until reality itself concludes its long experiment with existence. You're permanent in ways that gods aren't, preserved in ways that make immortality look temporary by comparison. And Morpheus continues his work, weaving dreams that feel like life, creating experiences that substitute for experience, giving you everything except the one thing that might actually matter, the choice to wake up, to participate in your own existence, to be present in the world rather than absent in elaborately crafted fantasy. The ancient Greeks told these stories, yours, Narcissus's, Echo's, Orpheus's, Psyche's, Tiresias's, because they understood that life is complicated, that love destroys as often as it saves, that the gifts we're given often come with prices we don't understand until far too late. They knew that beauty can be curse, that devotion can become imprisonment, that the difference between salvation and damnation sometimes comes down to a single choice, a backward glance, an opened box, a moment of doubt that transforms everything. Your story offers no clear moral, no simple lesson, no tidy conclusion about how to live or love or make impossible choices when gods interfere with mortal lives. You're just sleeping, have been sleeping, will continue sleeping, eternal and unchanging and completely absent from your own story. You're the most passive protagonist imaginable, the hero who does nothing, the beloved who never confirms or denies the love that's claimed him. And maybe that's the point. Maybe you're not meant to teach lessons, but simply to exist as a reminder that sometimes we're swept up in forces beyond our control, that sometimes the story happens to us rather than through us, that sometimes the kindest thing to do is accept that we don't always get to participate in our own narratives. We just have to trust that someone somewhere is weaving our dreams into something bearable, something beautiful, something that makes the absence of choice feel almost like peace. So sleep on, Endymion. Dream your 1,000 lives. Let Morpheus craft his elaborate fantasies and Selene watch with devoted eyes, and the world turn without your participation. You're safe here, preserved here, loved here, in the only way divine love knows how, completely, eternally, and at the cost of everything that made you human except your beauty, which was apparently the only part that mattered anyway. The moon rises over Mount Latmos tonight like it does every night, silver and distant and faithfully devoted. Morpheus descends to continue his work, shaping the dream you'll live tonight. Maybe you're a musician this time, or an explorer, or a philosopher debating the nature of reality without realizing you're already living in an answer to that question. And you breathe slowly, peacefully, eternally. The shepherd who became symbol, the mortal who became myth, the man who became monument to love's terrible selfishness and its genuine devotion, both at once, forever. The story's quiet now, settling like dust after a long journey. You've walked through myths tonight, visited lovers and prophets and souls who struggled against divine will or surrendered to it. Their voices fade into whisper, into memory, into the soft rhythm of breath that accompanies all sleep, all rest, all gentle descent into darkness that feels safe rather than frightening. Close your eyes and feel the weight of your own body, present and real, unlike Endymion's frozen form or Psyche's tested spirit. You're here, now, choosing sleep rather than having it imposed, embracing rest rather than being trapped in it. That's your gift tonight, the ability to let go willingly, to trust that morning will come, that dreams will cradle you gently, that Morpheus will be kind in his craft. The moon watches over everyone who sleeps tonight, not with Selene's desperate devotion, but with simple, steady light, marking time's passage without demanding anything in return. The stars turn in their ancient patterns, the earth breathes its slow geological breath, and you, small and temporary and beautifully mortal, get to rest. Let the myths dissolve into metaphor, into comfort, into background music for your own descent. You're not trapped like Endymion, not tested like Psyche, not mourning like Orpheus. You're simply tired, and sleep is waiting with open arms, offering dreams that you'll wake from, experiences you'll return from, rest that restores rather than imprisons. Breathe slowly. Feel yourself settling. The stories have done their work, walked you to the edge of sleep where consciousness blurs into something softer. Stay here as long as you need. Let the myths keep their watch while you slip into your own dreams, temporary and gentle and perfectly beautifully yours. Sweet dreams, traveller. The morning will find you whole. End of script. Sweet dreams.